But at that moment she truly believed she would keep her word if it brought rescue. Any promise to anyone who would free her, even a man. By the time low tents appeared, their dark colors fading into the forested mountainsides as well as the cat had, Galina had two maidens supporting her, pulling her along. Shouts rose from every side, glad cries of greeting, but Galina was dragged on behind the wise ones, deeper into the camp, still running, stumbling. Without warning, the hands left her arms. She pitched forward on her face and lay there with her nose in the dirt and dead leaves, sucking air through her gaping mouth. She coughed on a piece of leaf, but she was too weak to turn her head. The blood pounded her ears, but voices came to her and slowly began to make sense. "Took your time, Terava," a familiar-sounding woman's voice said. 9 days. We have been back long since." 9 days? Galina shook her head, scrubbing her face on the ground. Since the Aiel had shot her horse from under her, memory blended all the days into a mélange of thirst and running and being beaten, but surely it had been longer ago than 9 days. Weeks, certainly. A month or more. "Bring her in," the familiar voice said impatiently. Hands pulled her up, shoved her forward, bending her to go under the edge of a large tent with the sides raised all around. She was thrown down on layered carpets, the edge of a red and blue Tyran maze overlapping gaudy flowers beneath her nose. With difficulty she raised her head. At first she saw nothing but Savannah, seated on a large yellow-tasseled cushion in front of her. Savannah with her hair like fine spun gold, her clear emerald eyes. Treacherous Savannah, who had given her word to distract attention by raiding into Cairhien, then broken her pledge by trying to free Althor. Savannah, who at the least might take her from Terava's clutches. She struggled up onto her knees and for the first time realized there were others in the tent. Terava sat on a cushion to Savannah's right, at the head of a curving line of wise ones, 14 women who could channel in all, though Mikara, who still held the shield on her, stood at the foot of the line rather than sitting. Half of them had been among the wise ones who captured her with such scornful ease. She would never again be so careless about wise ones. Never again. Short, pale-faced men and women in white robes moved behind the wise ones, wordlessly offering trays of gold or silver with small cups, and more did the same on the other side of the tent, where a gray-haired woman in an Aiel coat and breeches of brown and gray sat to Savannah's left, at the head of a line of 12 stone-faced Aiel men. Men, and she wore nothing but her shift, ripped and gaping in a number of places. Galina clamped her teeth shut to stifle a scream. She forced her back stiff to keep from trying to burrow into the rugs and hide from those cold male eyes. "It seems that Aes Sedai can lie," Savannah said, and the blood drained from Galina's face. The woman could not know. She could not. "You made pledges, Galina Casban, and broke them. Did you think you could murder a wise one and then run beyond the reach of our spears?" For a moment relief froze Galina's tongue. Savannah did not know about the Black Aja. Had she not abandoned the light long ago, she would have thanked the light. Relief stilled her tongue, and a tiny spark of indignation. They attacked Aes Sedai, and were angry when some of them died? A tiny spark was all she could manage. After all, what was Savannah's twisting facts alongside days of beatings and Terava's eyes? A pained, croaking laugh bubbled up at the absurdity of it. Her throat was so dry. "Be thankful some of you still live," she managed past her laughter. "Even now it is not too late to rectify your mistakes, Savannah." With an effort she swallowed rueful mirth before it turned to tears. Just before. "When I return to the White Tower, I will remember those who assist me, even now," she would have added, "and those who do otherwise," but Terava's unwavering stare set fear fluttering in her middle. For all she knew, Terava still might be allowed to do whatever she wished. There had to be some way to induce Savannah to take charge of her. That tasted bitter, yet anything was better than Terava. Savannah was ambitious and greedy. In the midst of frowning at Galena, she had caught sight of her own hand and directed a brief, admiring smile at rings set with large emeralds and fire drops. She wore rings on half her fingers, and necklaces of pearls and rubies and diamonds fit for any queen draped across the swell of her bosom. Savannah could not be trusted, but perhaps she could be bought. Terava was a force of nature. As well try to buy a flood or an avalanche. "I trust that you will do what is right, Savannah," she finished. "The rewards of friendship with the White Tower are great." For a long moment there was silence except for the whisper of the white robes as the servants moved with their trays. Then, "You are Datsang," Savannah said. Galena blinked. She was a despised one? Certainly they had displayed their contempt plainly, but why? "You are Datsang," a round-faced wise one she did not know intoned, and a woman a hand taller than Terava repeated, "You are Datsang." Terava's hawk-like face might have been carved from wood, yet her eyes fixed on Galena glittered accusingly. Galena felt nailed to the spot where she knelt, unable to move a muscle. A hypnotized bird watching a serpent slither nearer. No one had ever made her feel that way. No one. "Three wise ones have spoken." Savannah's satisfied smile was almost welcoming. Terava's face was stark. The woman did not like whatever had just happened. Something had happened, even if Galena did not know what, except that it appeared to have delivered her from Terava. That was more than enough for the moment. More than enough. When maidens cut her bounds and stuffed her into a black wool robe, she was so grateful she almost did not care that they tore off the remnants of her shift first, in front of those ice-eyed men. The thick wool was hot and itchy and scratchy on her welts, and she welcomed it as though it were silk. Despite Mikara still shielding her, she could have laughed as the maidens led her out of the tent. It did not take long for that desire to vanish entirely. It did not take her long to begin wondering whether begging on her knees before Savannah would do any good. She would have done it, could she have gotten to the woman, except that Mikara made it plain she was not going anywhere she was not told to go, or speak a word unless spoken to. Arms folded, Savannah watched the Aes Sedai, the Datsang, stagger down the mountainside and stop beside a maiden squatting on her heels with a switch to drop the head-shaped stone she had been carrying in her hands. The black hood turned in Savannah's direction for a moment, but the Datsang quickly bent to pick up another large stone and turned to labor back up the 50 paces to where Mikara waited with another maiden. There she dropped that stone, picked up another, and started back down. Datsang were always shamed with useless labor. Unless there was great need, the woman would not be allowed to carry even a cup of water, yet toil without purpose would fill her hours till she burst of shame. The sun had a long way to climb yet, and many more days lay ahead. "I did not think she would condemn herself out of her own mouth," Riala said at Savannah's shoulder. "Effalin and the others are all but sure she openly admitted killing Desane." "She is mine, Savannah." Terava's jaw tightened. She might have taken the woman, but Datsang belonged to no one. "I intended to dress her in Gaishain robes of silk," she muttered. "What is the purpose of this, Savannah? I expected to have to argue against cutting her throat, not this." Riala tossed her head, casting a sidelong glance at Savannah. "Savannah intends to break her. We have had long talks of what to do should we capture any Aes Sedai. Savannah wants a tame Aes Sedai to wear white and serve her. An Aes Sedai in black will do well enough, though." Savannah shifted her shawl, irritated by the woman's tone. Not quite mocking, but all too aware that she wanted somehow to use the Aes Sedai's channeling as though it were Savannah's own. It would be possible. 2 Gaishain passed the 3 wise ones, carrying a large brass-strapped chest between them. Short and pale-faced, husband and wife, they had been lord and lady in the tree-killer's lands. The pair bowed their heads more meekly than any Aiel in white ever could have managed. Their dark eyes were tight with fear of a harsh word, much less a switch. Wetlanders could be tamed like horses. The woman is tamed already, Tarava grumbled. I have looked into her eyes. She is a bird fluttering in the hand and afraid to fly. In 9 days? Riala said incredulously, and Savannah shook her head vigorously. She is Aes Sedai, Tarava. You saw her face go pale with fury when I accused her. You heard her laugh as she spoke of killing wise ones. She made a vexed, angry sound. And you heard her threaten us. The woman had been as slippery as the tree killers, speaking of rewards and letting the threat, if no rewards came, shout silently. But what else could be expected of Aes Sedai? It will take long to break her, but this Aes Sedai will beg to obey if it takes a year. Once she did that, Aes Sedai could not lie, of course. She had expected Galina to deny her accusation. Once she swore to obey. If you want to make an Aes Sedai obey you, a man's voice said behind her, this might help. Incredulous, Savannah spun about to find Kadar standing there, and beside him the woman, the Aes Sedai, Macia, both dressed in dark silk and fine lace as they had been 6 days ago, each with a bulging sack hanging incongruously from one shoulder by a strap. Kadar held out a smooth white rod about a foot long in one dark hand. How did you come here? She demanded, then compressed her lips in anger. Plainly he had come as he had before. She was just surprised at him appearing here in the middle of the camp. She snatched the white rod he offered, and as always he stepped back beyond arm's reach. Why have you come? She amended. What is this? A little slimmer than her wrist, the rod was smooth except for a few odd flowing symbols incised on one flat end. It felt not quite like ivory, not quite like glass, very cool to the touch. You might call it an oath rod, Kadar said, showing teeth in what was doubtless meant for a smile. It only came into my hands yesterday, and I immediately thought of you. Savannah clamped her hands tight around the rod to keep from hurling it away. Everyone knew what the Aes Sedai's oath rod did. Trying not even to think, much less speak, she thrust it behind her belt and took her hands away. Riala frowned at the rod at Savannah's waist, and her eyes rose slowly, coldly, to Savannah's face. Tarava adjusted her shawl in a clatter of bracelets and gave her a hard, thin smile. There would never be any chance of one of them touching the rod, and maybe no chance of any other wise one doing so either. But there was still Galina Casban. One day she would break. Raven-eyed Macia, a little behind Kadar, smiled almost as faintly as Tarava. She had seen and understood. She was observant for a wetlander. Come, Savannah told Kadar. We will drink tea in my tent. She certainly would not share water with him. Lifting her skirts, she started up the slope. To her surprise, Kadar was also observant. All you need do is have your Aes Sedai. Walking easily beside her on his long legs, he grinned suddenly, toothily at Riala and Tarava. Or any woman who can channel, hold the rod and speak whatever promises you wish, while someone channels a little spirit into the number. The marks on the end of the rod, he added, raising his eyebrows insultingly. You can use it to release her, too, but that is more painful, or so I understand. Savannah's fingers touched the rod lightly, more glass than ivory, and very cool. It only works on women? She ducked into the tent ahead of him. The wise ones and the leaders of the warrior societies were gone, but the dozen tree-killer Gaishain remained, kneeling patiently to one side. No one person had ever kept a dozen Gaishain before, and she possessed more. There would have to be a new name for them, though, since they would never put off the white. Women who can channel, Savannah, Kadar said, following her in. The man's tone was incredibly insolent. His dark eyes shone with open amusement. You will have to wait until you have al'Thor before I give you what will control him. Removing the sack from his shoulder, he sat. Not on a cushion near hers, of course. Macia was not afraid of a blade in her ribs. She lounged on an elbow almost at Savannah's side. Savannah eyed her sideways, then casually undid another lace of her own blouse. She did not recall the woman's bosom being as round as that. For that matter, her face seemed even more beautiful as well. Savannah tried not to grind her teeth. "Of course," Kadar went on, "if you mean some other man, there is a thing called a binding chair. Binding people who cannot channel is more difficult than binding those who can. Perhaps a binding chair survived the breaking, but you will have to wait while I find it." Savannah touched the rod again, then impatiently ordered one of the Gaishain to bring tea. She could wait. Kadar was a fool. Sooner or later he would give her everything she wanted of him, and now the rod could break Macia free of him. Surely then the woman would not protect him. For his insults he would wear black. Savannah took a small green porcelain cup from the tray the Gaishain held and gave it to the Aes Sedai with her own hands. "It is flavored with mint, Macia. You will find it refreshing." The woman smiled, but those black eyes— well, what could be done to one Aes Sedai could be done to two, or more. "What of the traveling boxes?" Savannah demanded curtly. Kadar waved the Gaishain away and patted the sack beside him. "I brought as many Narbaha, that is what they were called, as many as I could find. Enough to transport all of you by nightfall if you hurry. And I would if I were you. Althor means to finish you, it seems. 2 clans are coming up from the south, and 2 more are moving to come down from the north, with their wise ones all ready to channel. Their orders are to stay until every last one of you is dead or a prisoner." Tirava sniffed. "A reason to move, certainly, Wetlander, but not to run. Even 4 clans cannot sweep Kinslayer's dagger in a day." "Didn't I say?" Kadar's smile was not at all pleasant. "It seems Althor has bound some Aes Sedai to him too, and they have taught the wise ones how to travel without a Narbaha, over short distances at least, 20 or 30 miles. A recent discovery, it seems. They could be here, well, today. All 4 clans." Maybe he lied. Yet the risk— Savannah could imagine all too well being in Cerilia's grip. Not allowing herself to shiver, she sent Riala to inform the other wise ones. Her voice betrayed nothing. Reaching into his bag, Kadar drew out a gray stone cube, smaller than the call box she had used to summon him and much plainer, with no marking but a bright red disc set in one face. "This is a Narbaha," he said. "It uses Saidin, so none of you will see anything, and it has limits. If a woman touches it, it won't work for days afterward, so I will have to hand them out myself. And it has other limits. Once opened, the gateway will remain for a fixed time, sufficient for a few thousand to go through if they don't waste time, and the Narbaha needs 3 days to recover afterward. I have enough extra to carry us where we need to go today, but—" Tirava leaned forward so intently she looked about to fall over, but Savannah hardly listened. She did not doubt Kadar exactly. He would not dare betray them, not while he hungered for the gold the Shido would give him. There were small things, though. Macia seemed to study him over her tea. Why? And if there was such need for speed, why was there no urgency in his voice? He would not betray, but she would take precautions anyway.
Merrick frowned at the stone cube the Wetlander had given him, then at the hole that had appeared when he pressed the red spot. A hole 5 paces wide and 3 high in midair. Beyond lay rolling hills, not low, covered with brown grass. He did not like things to do with the One Power, especially the male part of it. Savannah stepped through another smaller hole, with the Wetlander and a dark woman, following the wise ones Savannah and Riala had chosen out. Only a handful of wise ones remained with the Moshae Shido. Through that second hole, he could see Savannah talking with Bendwin. The Green Salt's Sept would find themselves with few wise ones too. Merrick was sure of it. Dirella touched his arm. "Husband," she murmured. "Savannah said it would only remain open a short while." Merrick nodded. Dirella always saw straight to the point. Veiling himself, he ran forward and leaped through the hole he had made. Whatever Savannah and the Wetlander said, he would send none of his Moshane through before he knew it was safe. He landed heavily on a slope covered with dead grass and nearly pitched head over heels down the hill before he caught himself. For a moment, he stared back up at the hole. On this side, it hung more than a foot above the ground. "Wife!" he shouted. "There is a drop!" Black eyes leaped through, veiled and spears ready, and maidens also. As well try to drink sand as try to keep maidens from being among the first. The rest of the Moshane followed at a run, Algaitsiswai and wives and children, jumping down on the fly. Craftsfolk and traders and Gaishine, most pulling heavily loaded pack horses and mules, near to 6,000 altogether. His sept, his people. They still would be once he went to Rodion. Savannah could not keep him from becoming clan chief for much longer. Scouts began spreading out immediately, while the sept still rushed out of the hole. Lowering his veil, Merrick shouted orders that sent a screen of Algaitsiswai toward the crests of the surrounding hills, while everyone else remained concealed below. There was no telling who or what lay beyond those hills. Rich lands, the Wetlander claimed, but this part did not look rich to him. The rush of his sept became a flood of Algaitsiswai he did not really trust. Men who had fled their own clans because they did not believe Randall Thor was truly the Karakar. Merrick was not sure what he himself believed, but a man did not abandon sept and clan. These men called themselves Meridin, the Brotherless, a fitting name, and he had 200. The hole suddenly snapped into a vertical slash of silver that sliced through 10 of the Brotherless. Pieces of them fell onto the slope, arms, legs. The front half of a man slid almost to Merrick's feet. Staring at the place where the hole had been, he stabbed at the red spot with his thumb. Useless, he knew, but Darin, his eldest son, was one of the stone dogs waiting as a rear guard. They would have been the last through. Surail, his eldest daughter, had remained with the stone dog for whom she was thinking of giving up the spear. His eyes met Dirella's, as green and beautiful as the day she had laid the wreath at his feet, and threatened to cut his throat if he did not pick it up. "We can wait," he said softly. The Wetlander had said 3 days, but maybe he was wrong. His thumb stabbed the red spot again. Dirella nodded calmly. He hoped there would be no need to cry in one another's arms once they could be alone. A maiden came skittering down the slope from above, hurriedly lowering her veil and actually breathing hard. "Merrick," Naisa said, not even waiting for him to see her. "There are spears to the east, only a few miles and running straight at us. I think they are Rain. At least 7,000 or 8,000 of them." He could see other Algaitsiswai running toward him. A young brother to the Eagle Cairden slid to a stop, speaking as soon as Merrick saw him. "I see you, Merrick. There are spears no more than 5 miles to the north, and Wetlanders on horses.
Hey, D-man,
Perhaps
how you
10,000
doing?
of each.
Hope you're doing
I do
well,
not think
bro.
any of us broke the crest, but some of the spears have turned toward us." Merrick knew
Good to
before the
see
grizzled
ya.
water seeker named Lairad opened his mouth. "Spears coming over a hill
Hold
3 or
on a
4
little
miles
bit.
to the south. 8,000 or more. Some of them saw one of the boys."
I say.
Lairad never wasted words, and he would never say which boy, who in truth could be anyone without gray hair to Lairad. There was no time for wasting words, Merrick knew. "Come out!" he shouted. No time for proper courtesy to a blacksmith either. The big man knew something was wrong. He scrambled up the slope, likely moving faster than he had since first picking up a hammer. Merrick handed him the stone cube. "You must press the red spot and keep pressing it no matter what happens, no matter how long it takes for that hole to open. That is the only way for any of you." Hummel nodded, but Merrick did not even wait for him to say that he would. Hummel would understand. Merrick touched Dirella's cheek, careless of how many eyes were on them. "Shade of my heart, you must prepare to put on white." Her hand strayed toward the hilt of her belt knife. She had been a maiden when she made his wreath, but he shook his head firmly. "You must live, wife, roof mistress, to hold together what remains." Nodding, she pressed fingers to his cheek. He was astonished. She had always been very reserved in public. Raising his veil, Merrick shoved one spear high above his head. "Machine!" he roared. "We dance!" Up the slope they followed him, men and maidens, nearly 1,000 strong, counting the brotherless. Perhaps they could be counted among the sept. Up the slope and west. That way lay the nearest and the fewest. Perhaps they might buy enough time, though he did not really believe that. He wondered whether Savannah had known of this. The world had grown very strange since Rand al'Thor came. Some things could not change, though. Laughing, he began to sing. Wash the spears while the sun climbs high. Wash the spears while the sun falls low. Wash the spears, who fears to die? Wash the spears, no one I know. Singing, the Moshain Shaido ran to dance their deaths.
Frowning, Grendal watched the gateway close behind the last of the Jumai Shaido. The Jumai and a great many wise ones. Unlike with the others, Samael had not simply knotted this web so it would fall apart eventually. At least she assumed he held it to the last. The closing, right on the heels of the last brown and gray-clad men, was too fortuitous otherwise. Laughing, Samael tossed away the bag, still holding a few of those useless bits of stone. Her own empty sack was long since discarded. The sun sat low behind the mountains to the west, half of a glowing red ball. "One of these days," she said dryly, "you will be too smart for your own good." A fool box, Samael? Suppose one of them had understood. None did, he said simply, but he kept rubbing his hands together and staring at where the gateway had been, or maybe at something beyond. He still held the mask of mirrors, giving him the illusion of added height. She had dropped hers as soon as the gateway closed. Well, you certainly managed to put a panic into them. Around them lay the evidence, a few low tents still standing, blankets, a cook pot, a rag doll, all sorts of rubbish lying where it had fallen. Where did you send them? Somewhere ahead of al'Thor's army, I suppose? Some, he said absently. Enough. His staring introspection vanished abruptly, and his disguise as well. The scar across his face seemed especially livid. Enough to cause trouble, particularly with their wise ones channeling, but not so many that anyone will suspect me. The rest are scattered from Ilion to Gildan. As to how or why, maybe al'Thor did it, for his own reasons, but I certainly wouldn't have wasted most of them if it was my work, now would I? He laughed again, caught up in his own brilliance. She adjusted the bodice of her dress to cover a start. Competing that way was remarkably silly. She had told herself that 10,000 times and never listened once. Remarkably silly. And now the dress felt as if it might fall off, which had nothing to do with her start. He did not know Savannah had taken every Shaido woman who could channel with her. Was it finally time to abandon him? If she threw herself on Demon Dread's mercy, as if reading her thoughts, he said, "You are tied to me as tightly as my belt, Grendal." A gateway opened, revealing his private rooms in Ilion. "The truth doesn't matter anymore if it ever has. You rise with me or fall with me. The Great Lord rewards success, and he's never cared how it was achieved." "As you say," she told him. Demon Dread had no mercy. "And Semirhage, I rise or fall with you." Still, something would have to be worked out. The Great Lord rewarded success, but she would not be pulled down if Samael failed. She opened a gateway to her palace in Arad Doman, to the long columned room where she could see her pets frolicking in the pool. "But what if al'Thor comes after you himself? What then?" "al'Thor isn't going after anyone," Samael laughed. "All I have to do is wait." Still laughing, he stepped into his gateway and let it close.
The Myrddraal moved from the deeper shadows, becoming visible. In its eyes, the gateways had left a residue, 3 patches of glowing mist. It could not tell one flow from another, but it could distinguish saidin from saidar by the smell. saidin smelled like the sharp edge of a knife, the point of a thorn. Saidar smelled soft, but like something that would grow harder the harder it was pressed. No other Myrddraal could smell that difference. Shaidah Haran was like no other Myrddraal. Picking up a discarded spear, Shaidah Haran used it to upend the bag Samael had discarded, then to stir the bits of stone that fell out. Much was happening outside the plan. Would these events churn chaos, or... Angry black flames raced down the spear haft from Shaidah Haran's hand, the hand of the shadow. In an instant, the wooden haft was charred and twisted. The spearhead dropped off. The Myrddraal let the blackened stick fall and dusted soot from its palm. If Samael served chaos, then all was well. If not... A sudden ache climbed the back of its neck. A faint weakness washed along its limbs. Too long away from Shale Ghul. That tie had to be severed somehow. With a snarl, it turned to find the edge of shadow that it needed. The day was coming. It would come. Chapter 41. The last chapter. A Crown of Swords. Tossing, Rand dreamed. Wild dreams where he argued with Perrin and begged Mat to find Elaine. Where colors flashed just beyond sight, and Padan Fain leaped at him with a flashing blade. Sometimes he thought he heard a voice moaning for a dead woman in the heart of a fog. Dreams where he tried to explain himself to Elaine, to Aviendha, to Min, to all three at once. And even Min looked at him with scorn. Not to be disturbed. Cadsuane's voice. Part of his dreams? The voice frightened him. In his dream, he shouted for Lews Therin, and the sound echoed through a thick mist where shapes moved and people and horses died screaming. A fog where Cadsuane followed him implacably while he ran, panting. Alanna tried to soothe him, but she was afraid of Cadsuane too. He could feel her fear as strongly as his own. His head hurt, and his side. The old scar was fire. He felt saidin. Someone held saidin. Was it him? He did not know. He struggled to wake. "You'll kill him!" Min shouted. "I won't let you kill him!" His eyes opened, staring up at her face. Not looking at him, she had his head wrapped in her arms and was glaring at someone away from the bed. Her eyes were red. She had been crying, but no longer. Yes, he was in his own bed, in his rooms in the Sun Palace. He could see a heavy square blackwood bedpost set with wedges of ivory. Coatless, in a cream silk blouse, Min lay curled around him protectively, atop the linen sheet that covered him to the neck. Alanna was afraid, that lay shivering in the back of his head. Afraid for him. For some reason, he was sure of that. "I think he is awake, Min," Amis said gently. Min looked down, and her face, framed in dark ringlets, beamed with a sudden smile. Carefully, because he felt weak, he removed her arms and sat up. His head whirled dizzily, but he forced himself not to lie back again. His bed was ringed. To one side stood Amis, flanked by Bera and Karuna. Amis's two youthful features bore no expression at all, but she brushed back her long white hair and shifted a dark shawl as though tidying herself after a struggle. Outwardly, the two Aes Sedai were serene, yet with determined serenity. A queen ready to fight for her throne, a countrywoman ready to fight for her farm. Oddly, if he had ever seen three people stand together, and not just physically, it was those three, shoulder to shoulder as one. On the opposite side of the bed, Samitsu, with those silver bells in her hair, and a slender sister with thick black eyebrows and a wild look to her raven hair, stood with Cadsuane, who had her fists planted on her hips. Samitsu and the raven-haired Aes Sedai wore yellow-fringed shawls and had jaws set every bit as firmly as Bera or Karuna. Yet Cadsuane's stern stare made all four appear hesitant. The two groups of women were not staring at one another, but at the men. At the foot of the bed were Deshiva, with the silver sword and red and gold dragon glittering his collar, and Flynn and Narishma, all grim-faced, trying to watch the women on both sides of the bed at once. Jonan Adley stood beside them, his black coat looking singed on one sleeve. Saidin filled all four men, overflowing, it seemed. Dashiva held almost as much as Rand could have. Rand looked to Adley, who nodded slightly. Abruptly, Rand realized that he was not wearing anything beneath the sheet that had fallen to his waist, and nothing above except a bandage wound around his middle. "How long have I been asleep?" he asked. "How is it I'm alive?" He touched the pale bandage gingerly. "Thing's dagger came from Shadar Logoth. Once I saw it kill a man in moments with a scratch. He died fast and he died hard." Dashiva muttered a curse with Padan Fane's name in it. Samitsu and the other yellow exchanged startled looks, but Cadsuane merely nodded, the golden ornaments around her iron-gray bun swaying. "Yes, Shadar Logoth. That would explain several matters. You can thank Sumiko that you're alive, Master Flynn." She did not glance toward the grizzled man with his fringe of white hair, but he grinned as though she had given him a bow. In truth, surprisingly, the yellows did nod to him. "And Corella here, of course," Cadsuane went on. "Each has done a part, including some things I think have not been done since the breaking." Her voice turned grim. "Without all three, you would be dead by now. You still may die unless you let yourself be guided. You must rest without exertion." His stomach rumbled suddenly, loudly, and she added, "We've only been able to get a little water and broth down you since you were hurt. 2 days is a long time without food for a sick man." 2 days. Only 2. He avoided looking at Adley. "I'm getting up," he said. "I won't let them kill you, sheepherder," Min said with an obstinate glint in her eyes. "And I won't let you kill you either." She put her arms around his shoulders as if to hold him where he was. "If the Karakan wishes to rise," Amis said flatly, "I will have Nandera bring in the maidens from the corridor. Somera and Anila will be especially happy to give him just the assistance he needs." The corners of her mouth twitched toward a smile. Once a maiden herself, she knew close enough to everything in that situation. Neither Karuna nor Bera smiled. They frowned at him as at an obstinate fool. "Boy," Cadsuane said dryly, "I've already seen more of your hairless bottom cheeks than I wish to. But if you want to flaunt them in front of all 6 of us, perhaps someone will enjoy the show. If you fall on your face, though, I may just spank you before I put you back to bed." By Samitsu's face and Corella's, they would be happy to assist her. Narishma and Adley stared at Cadsuane in shock, while Flynn tugged at his coat as though arguing with himself. Dashiva, though, barked a rough laugh. "If you want us to clear the women out," the plain-faced man began preparing blows. Not shields, but complex weaves of spirit and fire that Rand suspected would put anyone they were laid on in too much pain to think of channeling. "No," he said quickly. Bera and Karuna would obey a simple order to go, and if Corella and Samitsu had helped keep him alive, he owed them more than pain. But if Cadsuane thought nakedness would hold him where he was, she was in for a surprise. He was not sure the maidens had left him any modesty at all. With a smile from Min, he unwound her arms, tossed back the sheet, and climbed out of the bed on Amis's side. The wise one's mouth tightened. He could almost see her considering whether to call for the maidens. Bera gave Amis an agonized, uncertain look, while Karuna hurriedly turned her back, her cheeks darkening. Slowly he walked to the wardrobe. Slowly because he expected he might give Cadsuane her chance if he tried to move quickly. "Pah!" she muttered behind him. "I vow I should smack the stubborn boy's bottom." Someone grunted what might have been agreement, or just disapproval of what he was doing. "Ah, but it's such a pretty bottom now, isn't it that?" someone else said in a lilting Mirandian accent. That must have been Corella. A good thing he had his head inside the wardrobe. Maybe the maidens had not peeled away as much modesty as he thought. Light. His face felt hot as a furnace. Hoping the motions of dressing would cover any wobbles, he climbed into his clothes hurriedly. His sword stood propped in the back of the wardrobe, sword belt wound around the dark boar-hide scabbard. He touched the long hilt, then took his hand away. Barefoot, he turned back to the others, while still tying the laces of his shirt. Min still sat cross-legged on the bed in her snug green silk breeches, by her expression, unable to decide between approval and frustration. "I need to talk with Dashiva and the other Ashaman," he said. "Alone." Min scrambled off the bed and ran to hug him. Not tightly. She was very careful of his bandaged side. "I've waited too long to see you awake again," she said, sliding an arm around his waist. "I need to be with you." She emphasized that just a tad. She must have had a viewing, or maybe she just wanted to help steady his legs. That arm seemed to offer support. Either way, he nodded. He was not all that steady. Laying a hand on her shoulder, he suddenly realized that he did not want the Ashaman to know how weak he was, any more than Cadsuane or Amis. Bera and Karuna made reluctant curtsies and started for the door, then hesitated when Amis did not move right away. "So long as you do not intend to leave these rooms," the wise one said, not in the slightest as though speaking to her Karakan. Rand raised a naked foot. "Do I look as though I'm going anywhere?" Amis sniffed, but with a glance at Atli, she gathered up Bera and Karuna and departed. Cadsuane and the other two were only a moment more in going. The gray-haired Green glanced at Atli too. It could not be much of a secret that he had been gone from Carrion for days. At the door, she paused. "Don't do anything foolish, boy." She sounded like a stern aunt, cautioning a shiftless nephew without much expectation he would listen. Samitsu and Karela followed her out, dividing their frowns between him and the Ashaman. As they vanished, Dashiva laughed, a sharp wheeze, shaking his head. He actually sounded amused. Rand stepped away from Min to fetch his boots from beside the wardrobe and take a rolled pair of stockings from inside. "I'll join you in the anteroom as soon as I'm booted, Dashiva." The plain-faced Ashaman gave a start. He had been frowning at Atli. "As you command, my Lord Dragon," he said, pressing fist to heart. Waiting until the four men were gone, Rand sat down in a chair with a feeling of relief and began pulling on his stockings. He was sure his legs felt stronger just for being up and moving. Stronger, but they still did not want to support him very well. "Are you sure this is wise?" Min said, kneeling beside his chair, and he gave her a startled look. If he had talked in his sleep during those 2 days, the Aes Sedai would have known. Amis would have had Anila and Samara and 50 more maidens waiting when he woke. He tugged the stocking the rest of the way up. "Do you have a viewing?" Min sat back on her heels, folded her arms beneath her breasts, and gave him a firm look. After a moment, she decided it was not working and sighed. "It's Cadsuane. She's going to teach you something. You and the Ashaman. All the Ashaman, I mean. It's something you have to learn, but I don't know what it is, except that none of you will like learning it from her. You aren't going to like it at all." Rand paused with a boot in hand, then stuffed his foot in. What could Cadsuane or any Aes Sedai teach the Ashaman? Women could not teach men, or men women. That was as hard a fact as the one power itself. "We will see," was all he said. Plainly, that did not satisfy Min. She knew it would happen, and so did he. She was never wrong. But what could Cadsuane possibly teach him? What would he let her teach him? The woman made him unsure of himself, uneasy in a way he had not felt since before the Stone of Tyr fell. Stamping his foot to settle it in the second boot, he fetched his sword belt from the wardrobe and a red coat worked in gold, the same he had worn to the sea folk. "What bargain did Marana make for me?" he asked, and she made an exasperated sound in her throat. "None, as of this morning," she said impatiently. "She and Raphella haven't left the ship since we did. but they've sent half a dozen messages asking if you're well enough to return. I don't think the bargaining has gone well for them without you. I suppose it's too much to hope that's where you're going. Not yet, he told her. Min said nothing, but she said it very loudly, fists on her hips and one eyebrow raised high. Well, she would know most of it soon enough. In the anteroom, all the Ashaman except Tashiva sprang out of their chairs when Rand appeared with Min. Staring at nothing and talking to himself, Tashiva did not notice until Rand reached the rising sun set in the floor, and then he blinked several times before rising. Rand addressed himself to Adley while fastening the dragon-shaped buckle of his sword belt. The army's reached the hill forts in Ilion already? He wanted to take one of the gilded armchairs, but would not let himself. How? It should have been several more days at the best. At best. Flynn and Narishma looked as startled as Tashiva. None of them had known where Adley and Hopwell had gone, or more. Deciding who to trust was always the difficulty. Trust a razor's edge. Adley drew himself up. There was something about his eyes, beneath those thick eyebrows. He had seen the wolf, as they said in Kyrian. The High Lord Wyraman left the foot behind and pressed forward with the horse, he said, reporting stiffly. The Aiel kept up, of course. He frowned. We encountered Aiel yesterday. Shido. I don't know how they got there. There were maybe 9 or 10,000 altogether, but they didn't seem to have any wise ones who could channel with them. And they didn't really slow us down. We reached the hill forts at noon today. Rand wanted to snarl. Leaving the foot behind? Did Wyraman think he was going to take palisaded forts on hilltops with horsemen? Probably. The man probably would have left the Aiel behind, too, if he could have outrun them. Fool nobles and their fool honor. Still, it did not matter. Except to the men who died because the High Lord Wyraman was contemptuous of anyone who did not fight from horseback. Eben and I began destroying the first palisades as soon as we arrived, Abby went on. Wyraman didn't much like that. I think he would have stopped us, but he was afraid to. Anyway, we began setting fire to the logs and blowing holes in the walls, but before we more than started, Samael came. A man channeling Saidin, at least, and a lot stronger than Eben or me. As strong as you, my Lord Dragon, I'd say. He was there right away, Rand said incredulously, but then he understood. He had been sure Samael would stay safe in Ilion, behind defenses woven of the power, if he thought he had to face Rand. Too many of the Forsaken had tried, and most were dead now. In spite of himself, Rand laughed, and had to hug his side. Laughing hurt. All that elaborate deception to convince Samael he would be anywhere but with the invading army, to bring the man out of Ilion, it all made unnecessary by a knife in Padan Fane's hand. 2 days. By this time, everybody who had eyes and ears in Kyrian, which certainly included the Forsaken, knew that the Dragon Reborn lay on the edge of death. As well toss wet wood on the fire as think otherwise. Men scheme and women plot, but the wheel weaves as it will. That was how they said it in Tyr. Go on, he said. Mor was with you last night? Yes, my Lord Dragon. Fedwin comes every night, just like he's supposed to. Last night it was plain as Eben's nose we'd reached the forts today. I don't understand any of this. Tashiva sounded upset. The muscle in his cheek was twitching. You've lured him out, but to what purpose? As soon as he feels a man channel with anything near your strength, he'll flee back to Ilion, and whatever traps and alarms he has woven. You won't get at him there. He will know as soon as a gateway opens within a mile of the city. We can save the army, Adley burst out. That's what we can do. Wyraman was still sending charges against that fort when I left, and Samael cuts everyone to rags despite anything Eben or I can do. He shifted the arm with the singed sleeve. We have to strike back and run immediately, and even so, he nearly burned us where we stood more than once. The Aiel are taking casualties too. They're only fighting the Ilioners who come out. The other hill forts must be emptying, so many were coming when I left. But anytime Samael sees 50 of us together, Aiel or anybody, he rips them apart. If there were 3 of him, or even 2, I'm not sure I'd find anybody alive when I go back. Tashiva stared at him, as if at a madman, and Adley shrugged suddenly, as though feeling the lightness of his bare black collar compared with the sword and dragon on the older man's. "Forgive me, Ashaman," he muttered, abashed, then added in a still lower voice, "but we can at least save them." "We will," Rand assured him, just not the way Adley expected. "You're all going to help me kill Samael today." Only Deshiva looked startled. The other men just nodded. Not even the Forsaken frightened them anymore. Rand expected argument out of Min, maybe a demand to come along, but she surprised him. "I expect you would as soon as no one found out you're gone before they had to," she murmured. He nodded, and she sighed. Perhaps the Forsaken had to depend on pigeons and eyes and ears, just like anyone else, but being too sure could be fatal. "The maidens will want to come if they know Min." They would want to, and he would be hard-pressed to refuse, if he could refuse. Yet the disappearance even of Nandera and whoever she had on guard might be too much. Min sighed again. "I suppose I could go talk to Nandera. I might be able to keep them out in the hallway for an hour. But they won't be pleased with me when they find out." He almost laughed again before he remembered his side. They definitely would not be pleased with her, or with him. "More to the point, farm boy, Amis won't be pleased. Or Sorlia. The things I let you get me into." He opened his mouth to tell her he had not asked her to do anything, yet before he could utter a word, she moved very close. Looking up at him through long lashes, she put a hand on his chest, tapping her fingers. She smiled warmly and kept her voice soft, but the fingers were a giveaway. "If you let anything happen to you, Randall Thor, I'll give Cadsuane a hand whether she needs one or not." Her smile brightened for a moment, almost cheerily, before she turned for the doors. He watched her go. She might make his head spin sometimes. Nearly every woman he had ever met had done that at least a time or two. But she did have a way of walking that made him want to watch. Abruptly, he realized Deshiva was watching as well, and licking his lips. Rand cleared his throat loudly enough to be heard over the sound of the door closing behind her. For some reason, the plain-faced man raised his hands defensively. It was not as though Rand glared at him. He could not go around glaring at men just because men wore tight breeches. Surrounding himself with the emptiness of the void, he seized Saidin and forced frozen fire and molten filth into the weaves for a gateway. Deshiva leaped back as it opened. Maybe having a hand sliced off would teach the man not to lick his lips like a goat. Something crooked and red spiderwebbed across the outside of the void. He stepped through onto bare dirt with Deshiva and the others right behind, releasing the source as soon as the last stepped clear. A sense of loss rushed in as Saidin left, as awareness of Alana dwindled. The loss had not seemed so great while Lews Therin was there, not so huge. Overhead, the golden sun was more than halfway down to the horizon. A gust of wind swept dust from under his boots without leaving any coolness behind. The gateway had opened in a cleared area, marked off by a rope strung between 4 wooden posts. At each corner stood a pair of guards in short coats and baggy trousers stuffed into their boots, swords that appeared slightly serpentine, hanging at their sides. Some had heavy mustaches that hung to their chins or thick beards, and all had bold noses and dark eyes that seemed tilted. As soon as Rand appeared, one of them went running. "What are we doing here?" Deshiva said, looking about incredulously. Around them stretched hundreds of sharp-peaked tents, gray and dusty white, tents and picket lines of already saddled horses. Caemlyn lay not many miles away, hidden behind the trees, and the Black Tower not much farther, but Taim would not know of this unless he had a spy watching. One of Fedwin Moore's tasks had been to listen, to feel for anyone trying to spy. In a ripple of murmurs spreading outward from the ropes, men with bold noses and serpentine swords rose from their heels and turned to stare expectantly toward Rand. Here and there women stood as well. Saldaean women often rode to the wars with their husbands, at least among the nobles and officers. There would be none of that today, though. Ducking under the rope, Rand strode directly to a tent, no different from any other, except for the banner on the staff in front. 3 simple red blossoms on a field of blue. The king's penny did not die back, even in Saldaean winters. When fires blackened the forests, those red flowers were always the first to reappear. A blossom nothing could kill, the sign of House Bashir. Inside the tent, Bashir himself was already booted and spurred, and his sword on his hip. Ominously, Dira was with him, in a riding dress the same shade as her husband's gray coat, and if she wore no sword, the long dagger at her belt, of heavy silver rondelles, would do to go on with. The leather gauntlets tucked behind that belt spoke of someone meaning to ride hard. "I hadn't expected this for days yet," Bashir said, rising from a folding camp chair. "Weeks, I hoped, in truth. I'd hoped to have most of Taim's leavings armed the way young Matt and I planned. I gathered every maker of crossbows I could find into a manufactory, and they're starting to produce them like a sow dropping piglets, but as it is, no more than 15,000 have crossbows and know what to do with them." With a questioning look, he lifted a silver pitcher from atop the maps spread out on his folding table. "Do we have time for punch?" "No punch," Rand said impatiently. Bashir had spoken before about the men Taim found who could not learn to channel, but he had scarcely listened. If Bashir thought he had trained them well enough, that was all that mattered. "Deshiva and 3 more Ashaman are waiting outside. As soon as Moore joins them, we'll be ready." He eyed Dira Nigaleen Tibashir, towering over her diminutive husband with her hawk's beak of a nose and her eyes that made a hawk's look mild. "No punch, Lord Bashir. And no wives. Not today." Dira opened her mouth, her dark eyes all but glowing suddenly. "No wives," Bashir said, knuckling his heavy gray-streaked mustaches. "I will pass the order." Turning to Dira, he held out his hand. "Wife," he said mildly. Rand winced, mild tone or no, and waited for the eruption. Dira's mouth thinned. She scowled down at her husband, a hawk ready to stoop on a mouse. Not that Bashir looked anything like a mouse, of course, just a much smaller hawk. She drew a deep breath. Dira could make drawing a deep breath seem a thing that should cause the earth to tremble. And unhooking her sheathed dagger from her belt, she laid it in her husband's hand. "We will talk of this later, Davram," she said. "At length." One day when he had time, Rand decided, he was going to make Bashir explain how he did that. If there ever was time. "At length," Bashir agreed, grinning through his mustaches as he stuffed the dagger behind his own belt. Maybe the man was simply suicidal. The rope had been taken down outside, and Rand stood waiting with Deshiva and the other Ashaman, while 9,000 Saldaean light horse arrayed themselves behind Bashir in a column of 3s. Somewhere behind them, 15,000 men who called themselves the Legion of the Dragon would be gathering afoot. Rand had glimpsed them, everyone in a blue coat made to button up the side, so the red and gold dragon across the chest would not be broken. Most carried steel-armed crossbows. Some bore heavy, unwieldy shields instead, but not one carried a pike. Whatever odd notion Matt and Bashir had cooked up, Rand hoped it would not lead a lot of this legion to death. Moore grinned eagerly while he waited, all but bouncing on his toes. Perhaps he was simply glad to be back in his black coat with the silver sword on his collar. Yet Adley and Narishma wore almost identical grins, and for that matter, Flynn's was not far off. They knew where they were going now, and what to do there. Deshiva was scowling at nothing as usual, his lips moving silently, as usual. Also silent, scowling, were the Saldaean women gathered behind Dira, watching from one side. Eagles and falcons, feathers ruffled and furious. Rand did not care how they grimaced and frowned. If he could face Nandera and the rest of the maidens after keeping them back from this, then the Saldaean men could put up with any number of lengthy discussions. Today, the light willing, no women would die because of him. So many men could not be lined up in a minute, even when they had been awaiting the order. But in a remarkably short time, Bashir raised his sword and called, "My Lord Dragon!" A shout rippled down the great column behind him. "The Lord Dragon!" Seizing the source, Rand made a gateway between the posts, 4 paces by 4, and ran through as he tied off the weave, filled with Sayadine, and the Ashaman on his heels, into a great open square surrounded by huge white columns, each topped with a marble wreath of olive branches. At the 2 ends of the square stood nearly identical purple-roofed palaces of columned walks and high balconies and slender spires. Those were the King's Palace and the slightly smaller Great Hall of the Council. This was the Square of Tammuz, in the heart of Ilion. A skinny man in a blue coat, with a beard that left his upper lip bare, stood gaping at the sight of Rand and the black-hooded Ashaman leaping out of a hole in midair, and a stout woman, in a green dress cut high enough to show green slippers and her ankles in green stockings, pressed both hands to her face and stood rooted right in front of them, her dark eyes popping.
Okay, I got to put my
All the people were stopping to stare,
my new
hawkers with
PlayStation.
their trays, carters halting their oxen, men and women and children with their mouths
One and
hanging
my
open.
brother's one.
Rand thrust his hands high and channeled. "I am the Dragon Reborn."
And here's
The word
mine.
boomed across the square, amplified by air and fire, and flames shot up from his hands 100 feet. Behind him, the Ashaman filled the sky with balls of fire streaking in every direction. All save the Shiva, who made blue lightnings crackle in a jagged web above the square. No more was needed. A shrieking flood of humanity fled in all directions, away from the Square of Tammuz. They fled just in time. Rand and the Ashaman darted aside from the gateway, and Davram Bashir led his wildly screaming Saldaeans into Ilion, a flood of horsemen waving their swords as they poured out. Straight ahead, Bashir led the center line of the column, just as they had planned what seemed so long ago, while the other 2 lines peeled off to either side. They streamed away from the gateway, breaking apart into smaller groups, galloping into the streets leading out of the square. Rand did not wait to see the last of the horsemen exit. With well under a third out of the gateway, he immediately wove another, smaller opening. You did not need to know a place at all to travel if you only intended to go a very short distance. Around him, he felt the Shiva and the rest weaving their gateways. But he was already stepping through his own, letting it close behind him atop one of the slender towers of the king's palace. Absently, he wondered whether Matan Stepaneos den Balgar, the king of Ilion, was somewhere below him at that moment. The top of the spire stretched no more than 5 paces across, surrounded by a wall of red stone not quite chest high on him. At 50 paces, it was the highest point in all of the city. From there, he could see across rooftops glittering beneath the afternoon sun, red and green and every color, to the long earthen causeways that cut through the vast tall grass marsh surrounding city and harbor. A sharp tang of salt hung in the air. Ilion had no need of walls, with that all-enveloping marsh to
Actually,
stop an
everyone once I
attacker.
get it done.
Any attacker who could not make holes in the air. But then, walls would have done no good either. It was a pretty city, the buildings mainly of pale-dressed stone, a city crisscrossed by as many canals as streets, like traceries of blue-green from this height. But he did not stop to admire it. Low across the roofs of taverns and shops and spired palaces, he directed flows of air and water, fire and earth and spirit, turning as he did so. He did not try to weave the flows, simply swept them out over the city and a good mile out over the marsh. From 5 other towers came flows sweeping low, and where they touched one another uncontrolled, light flashed and sparks flared, and clouds of colored steam burst, a display any illuminator might have envied. A better way to frighten people under their beds and out of the way of Bashir's soldiers he could not imagine, though that was not the reason for it. Long ago, he had decided that Samael must have wards woven throughout the city, set to give an alarm should anyone channel Sayadine. Wards inverted so no one except Samael himself could find them. Wards that would tell Samael exactly where that man was channeling, so he could be destroyed on the instant. With luck, every one of those wards was being triggered now. Luce Theron had been sure Samael would sense them wherever he was, even at a distance. That was why the wardings should be useless now. That sort had to be remade once triggered. Samael would come. Never in his life had he relinquished anything he considered his, however shaky his claim.
They
Not
show
without a
everyone what
fight.
it looks like now.
All that from Luce Theron. If he was real. He had to be. Those memories had too much detail. But could not a madman dream his fancies in detail too? Lews Therin, he called silently. The wind blowing across Ilion answered.
Is the yellow one?
Below, the square up to Moose stood deserted and silent, empty except for a few abandoned carts. Edge on, the gateway was invisible except for the weaves. Reaching down to those weaves, Rand untied the knot and, as the gateway winked from existence, reluctantly released Saidin. All the flows vanished from the sky. Maybe some of the Ashaman still held on to the source, but he had told them not to. He had told them that any man he felt channeling in Ilion, once he himself stopped, he intended to kill without warning. He did not want to find out afterward that the channeler had been one of them. He leaned on the wall, waiting, wishing he could sit. His legs ached and his side burned however he stood, yet he might need to see as well as feel a weave. The city was not entirely quiet. From several directions he could hear distant shouts, the faint clash of metal. Even moving so many men to the border, Samael had not left Ilion entirely unprotected. Rand turned, trying to watch in every direction. He thought Samael would come to the king's palace, or that other at the far end of the square, but he could not be certain. Down one street he saw a band of Saldaeans clashing with an equal number of mounted men in shining breastplates. More Saldaeans suddenly galloped in from one side, and the fight vanished from his sight behind buildings. In another direction, he spotted some of the Legion of the Dragon, marching across the canal's low bridge. An officer marked by a tall red plume on his helmet strode ahead of some 20 men carrying wide shields as tall as their shoulders, followed by perhaps 200 more with heavy crossbows. How would they fight? Shouts, and steel ringing on steel in the distance, the faint screams of dying men. The sun slid downward, and shadows lengthened across the city. Twilight, and the sun a low crimson dome in the west. A few stars appeared. Had he been wrong? Would Samael simply go elsewhere, find another land to master? Had he been listening to anything other than his own mad ramblings? A man channeled. For a moment, Rand froze, staring at the great hall of the council. That had been enough of sighting for a gateway. He might not have felt a much smaller channeling the length of the square. It had to be Samael. In an instant, he had seized the source, woven a gateway, and leaped through with lightning ready to fly from his hands. It was a large room, lit by huge mirrored golden stand lamps, and others hanging on chains from the ceiling, with snowy white marble walls carved in friezes showing battles, and ships crowding the marsh-bordered harbor of Ilion itself. At the far end of the room, 9 heavily carved and gilded armchairs stood like thrones atop a high, stair-fronted white dais, the center chair with a back higher than any other. Before he could release the gateway behind him, the tower top where he had stood exploded. He felt the wash of fire and earth even as a storm of stone fragments and dust struck through the gateway, knocking him down on his face. Pain stabbed his side as he landed, a sharp red lance digging into the void where he floated. That, as much as anything else, made him release the gateway. Someone else's pain, someone else's weakness. He could ignore them in the void. He moved, forcing another man's muscles to work, pushed himself up and scrambled away in a lurching run toward the dais, just as hundreds of red filaments burned down through the ceiling, burned through the sea blue marble floor in a wide circle all around where the residue of his gateway was still fading. One stabbed through the heel of his boot, through his heel, and he heard himself cry out as he fell. Not his pain, inside or foot. Not his. Rolling onto his back, he could see the remnants of those burning red wires still, fresh enough to make out fire and air, woven in a way he had not known. Enough to make out exactly the direction they had come from. Black holes in the floor, and ornately worked white plaster ceiling high overhead hissed and crackled loudly at the touch of the air. His hands rose, and he wove balefire. Began to weave it. Someone else's cheek stung from a remembered slap, and Cadsuane's voice hissed and crackled in his head like the holes the red filaments had made. Never again, boy. You will never do that again. It seemed that he heard Lews Therin whimpering in distant fear of what he was about to loose, but it almost destroyed the world once. Every flow but fire and air fell away, and he wove as he had seen. 1,000 fine hairs of red blossomed between his hands. Fanning out slightly, they shot upward. A circle of the ceiling, 2 feet across, fell in stone chips and plaster dust. Only after he had done it did he think that there might be someone between him and Samael. He intended to see Samael dead this day, but if he could do it without killing anyone else... The weaves vanished as he pulled himself to his feet once more and limped hurriedly to the doors in the side of the hall, tall things with every panel set with 9 golden bees the size of his fist. A small flow of air pushed one door open before he reached it, too small to be detected at any distance. Hobbling into the corridor, he sank to one knee. The other man's side was fire, his heel agony. Rand pulled his sword up and leaned on it, waiting. A clean-shaven fellow with plump pink cheeks peered around a corner down the way. Enough of his coat showed to name him a servant. At least, a coat green on one side and yellow on the other looked like livery. The fellow saw Rand and, very slowly, as though he might not be noticed if he moved slowly enough, slid back out of sight. Sooner or later, Samael would have to. "Ilion belongs to me!" The voice boomed in the air from every direction, and Rand cursed. It had to be the same weave he himself had used in the square, or something very like. It required so little of the power, he might not have felt the actual flows had he been within 10 paces of the man. "Ilion is mine. I won't destroy what belongs to me killing you. And I won't let you destroy it either. You had the nerve to come after me here? Do you have the courage to follow me again?" A sly mocking tone entering that thundering voice. "Do you have the courage?" Somewhere above, a gateway opened and closed. Rand had no doubt that was what it was. The courage? Did he have the courage? "I'm the Dragon Reborn," he muttered, "and I'm going to kill you." Leaving a gateway, he stepped through to a place floors above. It was another hallway, lined with wall hangings showing ships at sea. At the far end, the last crimson sliver of the sun shone through a colonnaded walk. The residue of Samael's gateway hung in the air, the dissipating flows like faintly glowing ghosts. Not so faint, Rand could not make them out, though. He began to weave, then stopped. He had leaped up here without a thought of a trap. If he copied what he saw exactly, he would step out wherever Samael had, or so close as made no difference. But with just a slight alteration, no way to be sure whether the change was 50 feet or 500, yet either was close enough. The vertical silver slash began to rotate open, revealing the shadow-cloaked ruins of greatness, not quite as dark as the hallway. Seen through the gateway, the sun was a slightly thicker slice of red, half hidden by a shattered dome. He knew that place. The last time he had gone there, he had added a name to that list of maidens in his head. The first time, that Unthane had followed and become more than a dark friend, worse than a dark friend. That Samael had fled to Shadar Logoth seemed like coming full circle in more ways than one. There was no time to waste now that he was opening the way. Before the gateway stopped widening, he ran through into the ravaged city that once had been called Aradhol, ran limping, letting the weave go as he ran, boots crunching on broken paving stones and dead weeds. The first corner he came to, he ducked around. The ground shook under his feet as roars sounded back the way he had come, light flashing atop flash in the twilight darkness. He felt the wash of earth and fire and air. Shrieks and bellows rose through the thunderous crashes. saidin pulsing inside him, he hobbled away without looking back. He ran, and with the power filling him, even in the dark shadows he could see clearly. All around the great city lay, huge marble palaces, each with 4 and 5 domes of different shapes painted crimson by the setting sun. Bronze fountains and statues at every intersection. Great stretches of columns running to towers that soared across the sun. They soared when intact, at least. More ended in abrupt jaggedness than not. For every dome that stood whole, 10 were broken eggshells with the top hacked off or one side gone. Statues lay toppled in fragments or stood with missing arms or heads. Swiftly deepening darkness raced across sprawling hills of rubble, the few stunted trees clinging to their slopes, twisted shapes like broken fingers against the sky. A fan of bricks and stone spread across the way from what might have been a small palace. Half its front missing, the rest of the columned facade leaned drunkenly toward the street. He stopped in the middle of the street, just short of the fan, waiting, feeling for another to use saidin. Clinging to the sides of the street was not a good idea, and not simply because any building might fall at any time. 1,000 unseen eyes seemed to watch from windows like gouged eye sockets, watch with a nearly palpable sense of anticipation. Distantly, he felt the new wound in his side throbbing, a slash of flame, echoing the evil that clung to the very dust of Shadowlogoth. The old scar clenched like a fist. The pain of his foot seemed very distant indeed. Closer, the void itself pulsated around him, the Dark One's taint and Saidin beating in time with a knife slash across his ribs. A dangerous place by daylight, Shadowlogoth. By night. Down the street, beyond a spired monument, miraculously standing straight, something moved. A shadowed shape darting across the way in the darkness. Rand almost channeled, but he could not believe Samael would go scudding that way. When he first stepped into the city, when Samael tried to destroy everything around his gateway, he had heard horrible screams. They had barely registered then. Nothing lived in Shadowlogoth, not even rats. Samael must have brought henchmen, fellows he did not mind killing in an attempt to reach Rand. Maybe one of them could lead Rand to Samael. He hurried forward as fast as he could, as soundlessly as he could. Shattered pavement crunched under his boots with a sound like bones snapping. He hoped it was loud only to his Saidin-enhanced ears. Stopping at the base of the spire, a thick stone needle covered with flowing script, he peered ahead. Whoever had moved was gone. Only fools or the madly brave went inside Shadowlogoth at night. The evil that stained Shadowlogoth, the evil that had murdered Aradhol, had not died with Aradhol. Farther along the street, a tendril of silver-gray fog wavered out of a window, creeping toward another that came to meet it from a wide gap in a high stone wall. The depth of that gap shone as though a full moon lay inside. With the night, Mashadar roamed its city prison, a vast presence that could appear in a dozen places at once, 100. Mashadar's touch was not a pleasant way to die. Inside Rand, the taint on Saidin beat harder. The distant fire in his side flickered like 10,000 lightnings, one on top of the last. Even the ground seemed to pound beneath his boots. He turned, half thinking to leave now. Very likely Samael had gone, now that Mashadar was out. Very likely the man had lured him here in the hope he would search the ruins until Mashadar killed him. He turned and stopped, crouching against the spire. 2 Trollocs were creeping down that street, bulky shapes in black mail, half again as tall as he, or more. Spikes stood out on the shoulders and elbows of their armor, and they carried spears with long black points and wicked hooks. To his Saidin-filled eyes, their faces stood out clearly, one distorted by an eagle's beak where mouth and nose should have been, the other by a boar's tusked snout. Every line of their creeping shouted fear. Trollocs loved killing, loved blood, but Shadowlogoth terrified them. There would be Myrddraal about. No Trolloc would have entered this city without Myrddraal to drive it. No Myrddraal would have entered without Samael driving. All of which meant Samael must still be here, or these Trollocs would be running for the gates, not hunting. And they were hunting. That boar's snout was snuffling the air for a scent. Abruptly, a figure in rags leaped from a window above the Trollocs, falling on them with spear already stabbing. An Aiel, a woman, shufel wrapped around her head, but veil hanging. The eagle-beaked Trolloc shrieked as her spear point stabbed deep into its side, stabbed again. As its companion fell, kicking, Boarsnout spun with snarl, thrusting viciously, but she ducked low under the black hooked point and stabbed up into the creature's stomach, and it went down in a thrashing heap with the other. Rand was on his feet and running before he thought. "Laia!" he shouted. He had thought her dead, abandoned here by him, dead for him. Laia of the Corsada Charin. That name blazed on the list in his head. She whirled to confront him, spear ready in one hand, round bullhide buckler in the other. The face he remembered as pretty despite scars on both cheeks was contorted with rage. "Mine!" she hissed threateningly through her teeth. "Mine! No one may come here! No one!" He stopped in his tracks. That spear waited, eager to seek his ribs too. "Laia, you know me," he said softly. "You know me. I'll take you back to the maidens. Back to your spear sisters. He held out his hand. Her rage melted into a twisted frown. She tilted her head to one side. Randall Thor, she said slowly. Her eyes widened, falling to the dead Trollocs, and a look of horror spread across her face. Randall Thor,
Hey, James, money.
she
How you
whispered,
doing?
fumbling the black veil into
You
place
doing
across
well?
her face with the hand that held the spear. The Karakan, she wailed, and fled. He hobbled after her, scrambling over piles of rubble spread across the street, falling, ripping his coat, falling again, and nearly ripping it off, rolling and picking himself up on the run. The weakness of his body was distant, and the pain of it, but even floating deep in the void, he could only push that body so hard. Laya vanished into the night. Around the next black-shadowed corner, he thought. He limped around that as fast as he could, and nearly ran into 4 black-mailed Trollocs in a murdroll,
Excuse me.
inky cloak hanging unnaturally still down its back as the Fade moved. The Trollocs snarled in surprise, yet shock lasted less than a heartbeat. Hooked spears and scythe-curved swords rose. The murdroll's dead black blade was in its fist, a blade that gave wounds almost as deadly as Fane's dagger. Rand did not even try to draw the heron-marked sword at his side. Death in a tattered red coat he channeled, and a sword of fire was in his hands, pulsing darkly with the throb of Saidin, sweeping an eyeless head from its shoulders. Simpler to have destroyed them all the way he'd seen the Ashraman kill at Dumai's Wells, but changing the weaves now, trying to change, might be a fatal moment. Those swords could kill even him. He danced the forms in a darkness lit by the flame in his hands, shadows flying across faces above him, faces with wolves' muzzles and goats, faces contorted in screams as his fiery blade sliced through black mail and the flesh beneath as if they were water. Trollocs depended on numbers and overwhelming ferocity. Facing him and that sort of a power, they might as well have stood stock still, unarmed. The sword vanished from his hands. Still poised at the end of the form called Twisting the Wind, he stood among death. The last Trolloc to fall still thrashed, goat horns scraping on the fragmented pavement. The headless murdroll yet flung its arms about, of course, booted feet scrabbling wildly. Half-men did not die quickly, even headless. No sooner did the sword disappear than silver lightning lanced down from the cloudless, starry sky. The first bolt struck with a deafening roar not 4 paces away. The world turned white, and the void collapsed. The ground bounced under him as another bolt struck, and another. He had not realized he was on his face until then. The air crackled. Dazed, he pushed himself up, half falling as he ran from a hail of lightning that ripped the street apart to a thunder of collapsing buildings. Straight ahead he staggered, not caring where, so long as it was away. Suddenly his head cleared enough for him to see where he was, reeling across a vast stone floor covered with tumbled chunks of stone, some as big as he. Here and there, dark uneven holes gaped in the floor stones. All around rose high walls and tier upon tier of deep balconies that ran all the way around. Only a small portion of what had once been a vast roof remained at one corner. Stars shone bright overhead. He lurched another step, and the floor gave way beneath him. Desperately, he flung out his hands. With a jolt, the right hand caught hold of a rough edge, tangled in the pitch blackness. The wall beneath his boots might be deep end into a basement, or a mile, for all he could tell. He could latch bands of air to the jagged rim of the hole above his head to help pull himself out, except somehow Samael had sensed the relatively small amount of Saidin used in the sword. There had been a delay before the lightning struck, but he could not say how long he had taken killing the Trollocs. A minute? Seconds? With a heave, he swung his left arm up, trying to catch the edge of the hole. Pain no longer buffered by the void stabbed through his side like a dagger going in. Spots danced in his vision. Worse, his right hand slipped on crumbling stone, and he could feel his fingers weakening. He was going to have to. A hand grabbed his right wrist. "You are a fool," a man's deep voice said. "Count yourself lucky I don't care to see you die today." The hand began drawing him up. "Are you going to help?" the voice demanded. "I don't intend to carry you on my shoulders or kill Samael for you." Shaking off his shock, Rand reached up and grabbed the rim of the hole, pulling despite the agony of his side. Despite the agony, he managed to acquire the void again, too, and seize Sayadin. He did not channel, but he wanted to be ready. His head and shoulders came above the floor, and he could see the other man, a big fellow, little older than he, with hair black as the night, and a coat black as an Ashaman's. Rand had never seen him before. At least he was not one of the Forsaken. Those faces he knew. He thought he did anyway. "Who are you?" he demanded. Still heaving, the man barked a laugh. "Just say I'm a wanderer passing through. Do you really want to talk now?" Saving his breath, Rand struggled upward, getting his chest over the lip, his waist. Abruptly, he realized that a glow bathed the floor around them, like the glow of a full moon. Twisting to look over his shoulder, he saw Mashadar. Not a tendril, but a shining silver-gray wave rolling out of one of the balconies, arching over their heads, descending. Without a thought, his free hand rose and fire shot upward, a bar of liquid white fire slicing across the wave sinking toward them. Dimly, he was aware of another bar of pale solid fire rising from the other man's hand that was not clasping his, a bar slashing the opposite way from his. The two touched. Head ringing like a struck gong, Rand convulsed, Sayadin and the void shattering. Everything was doubled in his eyes, the balconies, the chunks of stone lying about the floor. There seemed to be a pair of the other man overlapping one another, each clutching his head between two hands. Blinking, Rand searched for Mashadar. The wave of shining mist was gone, a glow of light in the balconies above, but dimming, receding, as Rand's eyes began to clear. Even mindless Mashadar fled balefire, it seemed. Unsteadily, he got to his feet and offered a hand. "I think we'd best move quickly. What happened there?" The other man pushed himself up, with a grimace at Rand's proffered hand. He was easily as tall as Rand, rare except among the Aiel. "I don't know what happened," he snarled. "Run if you want to live." He suited his own words immediately, dashing toward a row of open arches. Not in the nearest wall. Mashadar had come from that one. Fumbling for the void, Rand limped after him as best he could, but before they were completely across the floor, the bullets fell again, a storm of silver arrows. The two of them darted through the archways, pursued by the thunder of walls and floor collapsing behind them, by clouds of dust and a hail of stones. Shoulders hunched and an arm across his face, Rand ran coughing through a broad room where trembling arches supported the ceiling and bits of stone rained down. He burst out into a street before he knew it, stumbling 3 steps before stopping. The pain in his side made him want to bend over, but he thought his legs might give way if he did. His wounded foot throbbed. It seemed a year ago that red wire of fire and air had stabbed his heel. His rescuer stood watching him. Covered with dust head to toe, the fellow managed to look like a king. "Who are you?" Rand asked again. "One of Taim's men? Or did you cheat yourself? You can go to Caemlyn, you know, to the Black Tower. You don't have to live afraid of Aes Sedai." For some reason, saying that made him frown. He could not understand why. "I have never been afraid of Aes Sedai," the man snapped, then drew a deep breath. "You probably should leave here now, but if you intend to stay and kill Samael, you had better try thinking like him. You have shown you can. He always liked destroying a man in sight of one of that man's triumphs, if he could. Lacking that, somewhere the man had marked as his would do." "The Waygate," Rand said slowly. If he could be said to have marked anything in Shara Logoth, it had to be the Waygate. He's waiting near the Waygate, and he has traps set. Wards as well, it seemed, like those in Ilion, to detect a man channeling. Samael had planned this well. The man laughed wryly. "You can find the way, it seems, if you're led by the hand. Try not to stumble. A great many plans will have to be relayed if you let yourself be killed now." Turning, he started across the street for an alleyway ahead of them. "Wait!" Rand called. The fellow kept on, not looking back. "Who are you? What plans?" The man vanished into the alley. Rand teetered after him, but when he reached the mouth of the narrow alley, it was empty. Unbroken walls ran a good 100 paces to another street, where a glow told of yet another part of Mashadar abroad. But the man was gone. which was purely impossible. The fellow had had time to make a gateway, of course, if he knew how, but the residue would have been visible, and besides, that much of Saidin being woven so near would have shouted at him. Suddenly he realized that he had not felt Saidin when the man made balefire either. Just thinking of that, of the two streams touching, made his vision double again. Just for an instant, he could see the man's face again, sharp where everything else blurred. He shook his head until it cleared. "Who in the light are you?" he whispered. And after a moment, "What in the light are you?" Whoever or whatever, the man was gone, though. Samael was still in Shadar Logoth. With an effort, he managed to regain the void once more. The taint on Saidin vibrated now, humming its way deep into him. The void itself vibrated. But the weakness of watery muscles and the pain of injuries faded. He was going to kill one of the Forsaken before this night was done. Limping, he ghosted through the dark streets, placing his feet with great care. He still made noise, but the night was full of noise now. Shrieks and guttural cries sounded in the distance. Mindless Mashadar killed whatever it found, and Trollocs were dying in Shadar Logoth tonight as they had once long, long ago. Sometimes down a crossing street he saw Trollocs, 2 or 5 or a dozen, occasionally with a half-man, but most often not. None saw him, and he did not bother them. Not simply because Samael would detect any channeling. Those Trollocs and Myrddraal that Mashadar did not kill were still dead. Samael had almost certainly brought them by the ways, but apparently he did not realize just how Rand had marked the waygate here. Well short of the square where the waygate lay, Rand stopped and looked around. Nearby, a tower stood seemingly whole. Not nearly as tall as some, its top still rose more than 50 paces above the ground. The dark doorway at its base was empty, the wood long rotted away, and the hinges gone to dust. Through blackness relieved only by faint starlight through the windows, he climbed the winding stairs slowly, small clouds puffing up beneath his boots, every second step a stab of pain up his leg. Distant pain. On the tower top, he leaned against the smooth parapet to catch his breath. The idle thought came that he would never hear the end if Min learned of this. Min, or Amis, or Cadsuane for that matter. Across missing rooftops, he could see the great square that had been one of the most important in Aradhol. Once an Ogier grove had covered this part of the land, but within 30 years after the Ogier who had built the oldest parts of the city departed, the residents had cut down the trees to make room for expanding Aradhol. Palaces and the remains of palaces surrounded the huge square, the glow of Mashadar shining deep inside a few windows, and a huge mound of rubble covered one end, but in the center stood the waygate, apparently a tall, broad piece of stone. He was not close enough to see the delicately carved leaves and vines that covered it, but he could make out the toppled pieces of high fence that had once surrounded it. Power-wrought metal lying in a heap, they gleamed untarnished in the night. He could also see the trap he had woven around the waygate, inverted so no eye but his could see it. No way to tell by looking whether the Trollocs and Halfmen really had passed through it, yet if they had, they would die before long. A nasty thing. Whatever traps Samael had made down there were invisible to him, but that was expected. Likely they were not very pleasant either. At first he could not see Samael, but then someone moved among the fluted, flaring columns of a palace. Rand waited. He wanted to be sure. He had only one chance. The figure stepped forward, out of the columns, and a pace into the square, head swinging this way and that. Samael, with snowy lace shining at his throat, waiting to see Rand walk into the square, into the traps. Behind him, the glow in the windows of the palace brightened. Samael peered into the darkness lying across the square. Mashadar oozed out of the windows, thick billows of silver-gray fog sliding together, merging as they loomed above his head. Samael walked a little to one side, and the wave began to descend, slowly picking up speed as it fell. Rand shook his head. Samael was his. The flows needed for balefire seemed to gather themselves despite the fireflow of Cadsuane's voice. He raised his hand. A scream tore the darkness, a woman shrieking in agony beyond knowing. Rand saw Samael turn to stare toward the great mound of rubble, even as his own eyes flashed that way. Atop the mound, a shape stood outlined against the night sky in coat and breeches, a single thin tendril of Mashadar touching her leg. Arms outstretched, she thrashed about, unable to move from the spot, and her wordless wail seemed to call Rand's name. "Liar," he whispered. Unconsciously, he reached out, as though he could stretch his arm across the intervening distance and pull her away. Nothing could save what Mashadar touched, though. No more than anything could have saved him had Thane's dagger plunged into his heart. "Liar," he whispered, and balefire leaped from his hand. For less than a heartbeat, the shape of her still seemed to be there, all in stark blacks and snowy whites, and then she was gone, dead before her agony began. Screaming, Rand swept the balefire down toward the square, the rubble collapsing on itself, swept down death out of time, and let Saidin go before the bar of white touched the lake of Mashadar that now rolled across the square, billowing past the waygate toward rivers of glowing gray that flowed out from another palace on the other side. Samael had to be dead. He had to be. There had not been time for him to run, no time to weave a gateway. And if he had, Rand would have felt Saidin being worked. Samael was dead, killed by an evil almost as great as himself. Emotion raced across the outside of the void. Rand wanted to laugh, or perhaps cry. He had come here to kill one of the Forsaken, but instead, he had killed a woman he had abandoned here to her fate. For a long time, he stood on the tower top while the waning moon crossed the sky, almost at its half. Stood watching Mashadar fill the square completely, till only the very top of the waygate rose above the surface of the fog. Slowly, it began to ebb away, hunting elsewhere. If Samael had been alive, he could have killed the Dragon Reborn easily then. Rand was not sure he would have cared. Finally, he opened a gateway for skimming on the platform, a railless disc, half white and half black. Skimming was slower than traveling. It took him at least half an hour to reach Ilion, and the whole way he burned Laya's name into his mind again and again, flailing himself with it. He wished he could cry. He thought he had forgotten how. They were waiting for him in the king's palace in the throne room, Bashir and Dashiva and the Ashaman. It was exactly like the room he had seen at the other end of the square, down to the stand lamps and the scenes carved into the marble walls and the long white dais. Exactly the same, except for being slightly larger in every dimension, and instead of 9 chairs on the dais, there was only a great gilded throne with leopards for its arms, and 9 fist-sized golden bees that would stand above the head of whoever sat in it. Wearily, Rand sat himself down on the steps at the front of the dais. "I take it Samael is dead," Bashir said, looking him up and down in his ragged coat and dust. "He's dead," Rand said. Dashiva sighed loudly with relief. "The city is ours," Bashir went on. "Or I should say, yours." He laughed suddenly. "The fighting stopped quick enough once the right people found out it was you. Not much to it in the end." Dried blood made a black stain down one torn sleeve of his coat. "The council has been waiting eagerly for you to come back. Anxiously, you might say," he added with a wry grin. 8 sweating men had been standing at the far end of the throne room since Rand came in. They wore dark silk coats with gold or silver embroidery on the lapels and sleeves, and falls of lace at their throats and wrists. Some wore a beard that left the upper lip shaved clean, but every one had a broad sash of green silk slanted across his chest, with 9 golden bees marching up it. At Bashir's gesture, they came forward, bowing to Rand at about every 3rd step, for all the world as though he wore the finest garments sewn. A tall man seemed to be the leader, a round-faced fellow with one of those beards, with a natural dignity that appeared strained by worry. "My Lord Dragon," he said, bowing again and pressing both hands to his heart. "Forgive me, but Lord Bren do be nowhere to be found, and—" "He won't be," Rand said flatly. A muscle in the man's face jumped at Rand's tone, and he swallowed. "As you do say, my Lord Dragon," he murmured. I do be Lord Gregorin den Lucianos, my Lord Dragon. In Lord Bren's absence, I do speak for the Council of Nine. We do offer you. A hand at his side waved vigorously at a shorter, beardless man who stepped forward bearing a cushion draped with a length of green silk. We do offer you Ilion. The shorter man whipped the cloth away, revealing a heavy gold circlet, 2 inches wide, of laurel leaves. The city do be yours, of course, Gregorin went on anxiously. We did put an end to all resistance. We do offer you the crown and the throne and all of Ilion. Bran stared at the crown on its cushion, not moving a muscle. People had thought he meant to make himself a king in Tyr, feared he would in Carrion and Andor, but no one had offered him a crown before.
I'll be right back.
Why? Is Matten Stepaneus so willing to give up his throne? King Matten did disappear 2 days ago, Gregorin said. Some of us do fear. We do fear Lord Bren may have something to do with it. Bren does have... He stopped to swallow. Bren did have a great deal of influence with the king. Some might say too much. But he did be distracted in recent months. Matten had begun to reassert himself. Strips of grimy coat sleeve and pieces of shirt sleeve dangled as Rand reached to pick up the laurel crown. The dragon wound around his forearm, glittered in the lamplight as brightly as the golden crown. He turned it in his hands. You still haven't said why. Because I conquered you? He had conquered Tyr and Carrion too, but some turned on him in both lands still. Yet it seemed to be the only way. That do be part, Gregorin said dryly. Even so, we might have chosen one of our own. Kings have come from the council before. But the grain you did order sent from Tyr has your name on every lip with the light. Without that, many would be dead of starvation. Bren did see every stick of bread go to the army. Bran blinked and snatched one hand from the crown to suck on a pricked finger. Almost buried among the laurel leaves of the crown were the sharp points of swords. How long ago had he commanded the Tyrants to sell grain to their ancient enemy? Sell it, or die for refusing? He had not realized they kept on after he began preparations to invade Ilion. Maybe they feared to bring it up, but they had feared to stop, too. Maybe he had earned some right to this crown. Gingerly, he set the circle of laurel leaves on his head. Half those swords pointed up, half down. No head would wear this crown casually or easily. Gregorin bowed smoothly. The light illumine Rand al'Thor, King of Ilion, he intoned. The 7 other lords bowed with him, murmuring, The light illumine Rand al'Thor, King of Ilion. Bashir contented himself with a bow of his head. He was uncle to a queen, after all. But Dashiva cried out, All hail Rand al'Thor, King of the world! Flynn and the other Ashaman took it up. All hail Rand al'Thor, King of the world! All hail the King of the world! That had a good sound to it. The story spread, as stories will, and changed as stories change with time and distance, spreading out from Ilion by coasting ships and merchant trains of wagons, and pigeons sent in secret, spreading in ripples that danced with other ripples and made new. An army had come to Ilion, the story said, an army of Aiel, of Aes Sedai appearing from thin air, of men who could channel riding winged beasts, even an army of Saldaeans, though not many believed that one. Some tales said the Dragon Reborn had been presented the laurel crown of Ilion by the Council of Nine, and others by Matten Stepaneus himself on bended knee. Some said the Dragon Reborn had wrenched the crown from Matten's head, then stuck that head on a spike. No, the Dragon Reborn had raised Ilion to the ground and buried the old king in the rubble. No, he and his army of Ashaman had burned Ilion out of the earth. No, it was Abu Dar he had destroyed after Ilion. One fact, though, turned up again and again in those tales. The the laurel crown of Ilion had been given a new name, the Crown of Swords. And for some reason, men and women who told the tales often found a need to add almost identical words. "The storm is coming," they said, staring southward in worry. "The storm is coming."
Master of the lightnings, rider on the storm, bearer of a crown of swords, spinner out of fate, who thinks he turns the wheel of time may learn the truth too late. From a fragmentary translation of the Prophecies of the Dragon, attributed to Lord Mangor Kiramin, sword bard of Aramael and warder to Karaigan Makonar, into what was then called the Vulgar tongue, circa 300 AB. The end of the 7th book of the Wheel of Time.
This is on.
Let's see what to put on till tomorrow.
Is a wonderful place from the glimpse which I got of it from. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Today's reading by Kara Schallenberg, www.kray.org. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 1. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd of May. Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place from the glimpse which I got of it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late and would start as near the correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the west and entering the east. The most western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which is here of noble width and depth, took us among the traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time and came after nightfall to Klausenburg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up some way with red pepper, which was very good but thirsty. Memorandum. Get recipe for Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika Händel, and that, as it was a national dish, I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having had some time at my disposal when in London, I had visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Pennsylvania.
We're down to
It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in dealing with a nobleman of that country.
That's low for us.
I find that the district he named is in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own Ordnance Survey maps. But I found that Bistritz, the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes, as they may refresh my memory when I talk over my travels with Mina. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and mixed with them the Wallachs, who are the descendants of the Dacians, Magyars in the west, and Zekalese in the east and north. I am going among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns settled in it. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting. Memorandum. I must ask the Count all about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have had something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe, and was still thirsty. Towards morning I slept, and was wakened by the continuous knocking at my door, so I guess I must have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika, and a sort of porridge of maize flour, which they said was mamaliga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish, which they call impletata. Memorandum. Get recipe for this also. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started a little before 8, or rather it ought to have done so, for after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they to be in China? All day long we seemed to dawdle through a country which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on the top of steep hills, such as we see in old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams, which seemed from the wide stony margin on each side of them to be subject to great floods. It takes a lot of water, and running strong, to sweep the outside edge of a river clear. At every station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, and in all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France and Germany, with short jackets and round hats and homemade trousers. But others were very picturesque. The women looked pretty, except when you got near them, but they were very clumsy about the waist. They had all full white sleeves of some kind or other, and most of them had big belts with a lot of strips of something fluttering from them, like the dresses in a ballet, but of course there were petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy, dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts, nearly a foot wide, all studded over with brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked into them, and had long black hair and heavy black mustaches. They are very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage they would be set down at once as some old Oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless, and rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of twilight when we got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place. Being practically on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it into Bukovina, it has had a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions. At the very beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people, the casualties of war proper being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Krone Hotel, which I found, to my great delight, to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door, I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress. White undergarment with a long double apron, front and back, of colored stuff, fitting almost too tight for modesty. When I came close, she bowed and said, "The Herr Englishman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white shirt-sleeves, who had followed her to the door. He went, but immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow the diligence will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass my carriage will await you, and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula." 4th of May. I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count, directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me, but on making inquiries as to details, he seemed somewhat reticent, and pretended that he could not understand my German. This could not be true, because up to then he had understood it perfectly. At least he answered my questions exactly as if he did. He and his wife, the old lady who had received me, looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled out that the money had been sent in a letter, and that was all he knew. When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me anything of his castle, both he and his wife crossed themselves, and, saying that they knew nothing at all, simply refused to speak further. It was so near the time of starting that I had no time to ask anyone else, for it was all very mysterious, and not by any means comforting. Just before I was leaving, an old lady came up to my room, and said in a hysterical way, "Must you go? Oh, young Herr, must you go?" She was in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip of what German she knew, and mixed it all up with some other language which I did not know at all. I was just able to follow her by asking many questions. When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaged on important business, she asked again, "Do you know what day it is?" I answered that it was the 4th of May. She shook her head as she said again, "Oh yes, I know that. But do you know what day it is?" On my saying that I did not understand, she went on, "It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world will have full sway? Do you know where you are going, and what you are going to?" She was in such evident distress that I tried to comfort her, but without effect. Finally, she went down on her knees and implored me not to go, at least to wait a day or two before starting. It was all very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable. However, there was business to be done, and I could allow nothing to interfere with it. I tried to raise her up, and said as gravely as I could that I thanked her, but my duty was imperative, and that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and taking a crucifix from her neck, offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for, as an English churchman, I have been taught to regard such things as in some measure idolatrous, and yet it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well, and in such a state of mind. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary round my neck and said, "For your mother's sake," and went out of the room. I am writing up this part of the diary whilst I am waiting for the coach, which is, of course, late, and the crucifix is still round my neck. Whether it is the old lady's fear, or the many ghostly traditions of this place, or the crucifix itself, I do not know, but I am not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring my goodbye. Here comes the coach. 5th of May. The castle. The gray of the morning has passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seems jagged, whether with trees or hills I know not, for it is so far off that big things and little are mixed. I am not sleepy, and, as I am not to be called till I awake, naturally I write till sleep comes. There are many odd things to put down, and, lest who reads them may fancy that I dined too well before I left Bistritz, let me put down my dinner exactly. I dined on what they called robber steak, bits of bacon, onion, and beef, seasoned with red pepper and strung on sticks, and roasted over the fire in simple style of the London cat's meats. The wine was golden Mediasch, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple of glasses of this, and nothing else. When I got on the coach, the driver had not taken his seat, and I saw him talking to the landlady. They were evidently talking of me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door came and listened, and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words often repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd, so I quietly got my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them out. I must say they were not cheering to me, for amongst them were Ordog, Satan, Pokol, hell, Stregoica, witch, Vrolak, and Vrukoslak. Both mean the same thing, one being Slovak and the other Servian for something that is either werewolf or vampire. Memorandum. I must ask the Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross, and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant. He would not answer at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm, or guard, against the evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed so kind-hearted, and so sorrowful, and so sympathetic, that I could not but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn yard and its crowd of picturesque figures, all crossing themselves, as they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage of oleander and orange trees in green tubs clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the whole front of the box seat, Gotza, they call them, cracked his big whip over his 4 small horses, which ran abreast, and we set off on our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears in the beauty of the scene as we drove along, although had I known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of forests and woods, with here and there steep hills, crowned with clumps of trees or with farmhouses, the blank gable end to the road. There was everywhere a bewildering mass of fruit blossom, apple, plum, pear, cherry. And as we drove by, I could see the green grass under the trees, spangled with the fallen petals. In and out amongst these green hills of what they call here the Mittelland ran the road, losing itself as it swept round the grassy curve, or was shut out by the straggling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillsides like tongues of flame. The road was rugged, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand then what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgo Prund. I was told that this road is in summertime excellent, but that it had not yet been put in order after the winter snows. In this respect it is different from the general run of roads in the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept in too good order. Of old the hospodars would not repair them, lest the Turk should think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, and so hasten the war, which was always really at loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittelland rose mighty slopes of forest up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun falling full upon them and bringing out all the glorious colors of this beautiful range, deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where grass and rock mingled, and an endless perspective of jagged rock and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which, as the sun began to sink, we saw now and again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept round the base of a hill and opened up the lofty, snow-covered peak of a mountain, which seemed, as we wound on our serpentine way, to be right before us. "Look, Istenzek, God's seat," and he crossed himself reverently. As we wound on our endless way, and the sun sank lower and lower behind us, the shadows of the evening began to creep round us. This was emphasized by the fact that the snowy mountain tops still held the sunset, and seemed to glow out with a delicate, cool pink. Here and there we passed Czechs and Slovaks, all in picturesque attire, but I noticed that goiter was painfully prevalent. By the roadside were many crosses, and as we swept by, my companions all crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant man or a woman, kneeling before a shrine, who did not even turn round as we approached, but seemed in the self-surrender of devotion to have neither eyes nor ears for the outer world. There were many things new to me. For instance, hay-ricks in the trees, and here and there very beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a Leiterwagen, the ordinary peasant's cart, with its long, snake-like vertebra, calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Czechs with their white, and the Slovaks with their collared sheepskins, the latter carrying lance fashion their long staves, with axe at end. As the evening fell, it began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness with gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine, though in the valleys which ran deep between the spurs of the hills, as we ascended through the pass, the dark firs stood out here and there against the background of late-lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through the pine woods that seemed in the darkness to be closing down upon us, great masses of grayness, which here and there bestrewed the trees, produced a peculiarly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts and grim fancies engendered earlier in the evening, when the falling sunset threw into strange relief the ghost-like clouds, which amongst the Carpathians seemed to wind ceaselessly through the valleys. Sometimes the hills were so steep that, despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk up them as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. "No, no," he said, "you must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce." And then he added, with what he evidently meant for grim pleasantry, for he looked round to catch the approving smile of the rest, "And you may have enough of such matters before you go to sleep." The only stop he would make was a moment's pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and with wild cries of encouragement urged them on to further exertions. Then, through the darkness, I could see a sort of patch of gray light ahead of us, as though there were a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on its great leather springs and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew more level, and we appeared to fly along. Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side and to frown down upon us. We were entering on the Borgo Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with an earnestness which would take no denial. These were certainly of an odd and varied kind, but each was given in simple good faith, with a kindly word and a blessing, and that same strange mixture of fear-meaning movements which I had seen outside the hole at Bistritz, the sign of the cross, and the guard against the evil eye. Then, as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side the passengers, craning over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected, but though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. This state of excitement kept on for some little time, and at last we saw before us the pass opening out on the eastern side. There were dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy, oppressive sense of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres, and that now we had got into the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the blackness, but all was dark. The only light was the flickering rays of our own lamps, in which the steam from our hard-driven horses rose in a white cloud. We could see now the sandy road lying white before us, but there was on it no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best do, when the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something which I could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly, and in so low a tone. I thought it was an hour less than the time. Then, turning to me, he spoke in German worse than my own. "There is no carriage here. The Herr is not expected after all. He will now come on to Bukovina and return tomorrow, or the next day, better the next day." Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. Then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants, and a universal crossing of themselves, a calèche with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps as the rays fell on them that the horses were coal-black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight, as he turned to us. He said to the driver, "You are early tonight, my friend." The man stammered in reply, "The English Herr was in a hurry." To which the stranger replied, "That is why, I suppose, you wished him to go on to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, and my horses are swift." As he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on a hard-looking mouth, with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth as white as ivory. One of my companions whispered to another the line from Burger's Lenore, "Denn die Toten reiten schnell," for the dead travel fast. The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned his face away, at the same time putting out his 2 fingers and crossing himself. "Give me the Herr's luggage," said the driver, and with exceeding alacrity my bags were handed out and put in the caleche. Then I descended from the side of the coach, as the caleche was close alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook the reins, the horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the steam from the horses of the coach by the light of the lamps, and projected against it the figures of my late companions crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip and called to his horses, and off they swept on their way to Bukovina. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling came over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders and a rug across my knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chill, mein Herr, and my master the Count bade me take all care of you. There is a flask of Slivovitz, the plum brandy of the country, underneath the seat, if you should require it." I did not take any, but it was a comfort to know it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely, and not a little frightened. I think, had there been any alternative, I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along. Then we made a complete turn, and went along another straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground again, and so I took note of some salient point, and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what this all meant, but I really feared to do so, for I thought that, placed as I was, any protest would have had no effect in case there had been an intention to delay. By and by, however, as I was curious to know how time was passing, I struck a match, and by its flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes of midnight. This gave me a sort of shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited, with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road, a long, agonized wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another and another, till, borne on the wind, which now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it, through the gloom of the night. At the first howl, the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated, as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance, from the mountains on each side of us, began a louder and a sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way, for I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his great strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend and to stand before them. He petted and soothed them, and whispered something in their ears, as I have heard of horse tamers doing, and with extraordinary effect, for under his caresses they became quite manageable again, though they still trembled. The driver again took his seat, and shaking his reins, started off at a great pace. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, he suddenly turned down a narrow roadway which ran sharply to the right. Soon we were hemmed in with trees, which in places arched right over the roadway till we passed as through a tunnel. And again great frowning rocks guarded us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and the branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine, powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered with a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing round on us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head to left and right, but I could not see anything through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint, flickering blue flame. The driver saw it at the same moment. He at once checked the horses, and, jumping to the ground, disappeared into the darkness. I did not know what to do, the less as the howling of the wolves grew closer. But while I wondered, the driver suddenly reappeared again, and without a word took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly. And now looking back, it is like a sort of awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared so near the road that even in the darkness around us I could watch the driver's motions. He went rapidly to where the blue flame arose. It must have been very faint, for it did not seem to illumine the place around it at all, and, gathering a few stones, formed them into some device. Once there appeared a strange optical effect. When he stood between me and the flame, he did not obstruct it, for I could see its ghostly flicker all the same. This startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it that my eyes deceived me, straining through the darkness. Then for a time there were no blue flames, and we sped onwards through the gloom, with the howling of the wolves around us, as though they were following in a moving circle. At last there came a time when the driver went further afield than he had yet gone, and during his absence the horses began to tremble worse than ever, and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. But just then the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling, pine-clad rock, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long, sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible in the grim silence which held them than even when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. It is only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can understand their true import. All at once the wolves began to howl as though the moonlight had had some peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped about and reared, and looked helplessly round with eyes that rolled in a way painful to see. But the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce to remain within it. I called to the coachman to come, for it seemed to me that our only chance was to try to break out through the ring, and to aid his approach I shouted and beat the side of the caleche, hoping by the noise to scare the wolves from the side so as to give him a chance of reaching the trap. How he came there I know not, but I heard his voice raised in a tone of imperious command, and, looking towards the sound, saw him stand in the roadway. As he swept his long arms, as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle, the wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so that we were again in darkness. When I could see again, the driver was climbing into the caleche, and the wolves disappeared. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete darkness, for the rolling clouds obscured the moon. We kept on ascending, with occasional periods of quick descent, but in the main, always ascending. Suddenly I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the sky. End of chapter 1. Recorded on November 2nd, 2005, in Oceanside, California.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 2. Jonathan Harker's Journal continued. 5th of May. I must have been asleep, for certainly if I had been fully awake I must have noticed the approach of such a remarkable place. In the gloom the courtyard looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it under great round arches, it perhaps seemed bigger than it really is. I have not yet been able to see it by daylight. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again I could not but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vice that could have crushed mine if he had chosen. Then he took my traps and placed them on the ground beside me as I stood close to a great door, old and studded with large iron nails, and set in a projecting doorway of massive stone. I could see, even in the dim light, that the stone was massively carved, but that the carving had been much worn by time and weather. As I stood, the driver jumped again into his seat and shook the reins. The horses started forward, and trap and all disappeared down one of the dark openings. I stood in silence where I was, for I did not know what to do. Of bell or knocker there was no sign. Through these frowning walls and dark window openings it was not likely that my voice could penetrate. The time I waited seemed endless, and I felt doubts and fears crowding upon me. What sort of place had I come to, and among what kind of people? What sort of grim adventure was it on which I had embarked? Was this a customary incident in the life of a solicitor's clerk sent out to explain the purchase of a London estate to a foreigner? Solicitor's clerk. Mina would not like that. Solicitor, but just before leaving London I got word that my examination was successful and I am now a full-blown solicitor. I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if I were awake. It all seemed like a horrible nightmare to me, and I expected that I should suddenly awake and find myself at home, the dawn struggling in through the windows, as I had now and again felt in the morning after a day of overwork. But my flesh answered the pinching test, and my eyes were not to be deceived. I was indeed awake and among the Carpathians. All I could do now was to be patient and to wait the coming of morning. Just as I had come to this conclusion, I heard a heavy step approaching behind the great door, and I saw through the chinks the gleam of a coming light. Then there was the sound of rattling chains and the clanking of massive bolts drawn back. A key was turned with the loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall old man, clean-shaven save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, in which the flame burned without a chimney or globe of any kind, throwing long, quivering shadows as it flickered in the draught of the open door. The old man motioned me in with his right hand with a courtly gesture, saying in excellent English, but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own free will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue, as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I had stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively forward, and holding out his hand, grasped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring." The strength of the handshake was so much akin to what I had noticed in the driver, whose face I had not seen, that for a moment I doubted if it were not the same person to whom I was speaking. So to make sure, I said interrogatively, "Count Dracula?" He bowed in a courtly way as he replied, "I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in. The night air is chill, and you must need to eat and rest." As he was speaking, he put the lamp on a bracket on the wall and, stepping out, took my luggage. He had carried it in before I could forestall him. I protested, but he insisted. "Nay, sir, you are my guest. It is late, and my people are not available. Let me see to your comfort myself." He insisted on carrying my traps along the passage, and then up a great winding stair, and along another great passage on whose stone floor our steps rang heavily. At the end of this he threw open a heavy door, and I rejoiced to see within a well-lit room in which a table was spread for supper, and on whose mighty hearth a great fire of logs, freshly replenished, flamed and flared. The Count halted, putting down my bags, closed the door, and crossing the room opened another door, which led into a small octagonal room lit by a single lamp, and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door, and motioned me to enter. It was a welcome sight, for here was a great bedroom well lighted and warmed by another log fire also added to but lately, for the top logs were fresh, which sent a hollow roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, saying, before he closed the door, "You will need, after your journey, to refresh yourself by making your toilette. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth of the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. Having then reached my normal state, I discovered that I was half famished with hunger, so making a hasty toilette, I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood on one side of the great fireplace, leaning against the stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand toward the table and said, "I pray you be seated and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have dined already, and I do not sup." I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted to me. He opened it and read it gravely. Then, with a charming smile, he handed it to me to read. One passage of it at least gave me a thrill of pleasure. "I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am a constant sufferer, forbids absolutely any traveling on my part for some time to come. But I am happy to say I can send a sufficient substitute, one in whom I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood in my service. He shall be ready to attend on you when you will during his stay, and shall take your instructions in all matters." The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell to at once on excellent roast chicken. This, with some cheese and a salad and a bottle of old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, was my supper. During the time I was eating it, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by degrees all I had experienced. By this time I had finished my supper, and by my host's desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and begun to smoke a cigar which he offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him of a very marked physiognomy. His face was a very strong aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, and with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily round the temples but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto I had noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they had seemed rather white and fine, but seeing them now close to me I could not but notice that they were rather coarse, broad, with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were long and fine and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hands touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile, which showed more than he had yet done of his protuberant teeth, sat himself down again on his own side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed a strange stillness over everything, but as I listened, I heard as if from down below in the valley the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some expression in my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in the city cannot enter into the feelings of the hunter." Then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away till the afternoon, so sleep well and dream well." With a courteous bow, he opened for me himself the door of the octagonal room, and I entered my bedroom. I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt. I fear. I think strange things which I dare not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. 7th of May. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept till late in the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room where we had supped, and found a cold breakfast laid out, with coffee kept hot by the pot being placed on the hearth. There was a card on the table, on which was written, "I have to be absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D." I set to and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I had done, I looked for a bell, so that I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are round me. The table service is of gold, and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. The curtains and upholstery of the chairs and sofas, and the hangings of my bed are of the costliest and most beautiful fabrics, and must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they are centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still, in none of the rooms is there a mirror. There is not even a toilette glass on my table. I had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not yet seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near the castle, except the howling of wolves. Some time after I had finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, for it was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had it, I looked about for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room, book, newspaper, or even writing materials, so I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite mine I tried, but found locked. In the library I found to my great delight a vast number of English books, whole shelves full of them, and bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. A table in the center was littered with the English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were of very recent date. The books were of the most varied kind: history, geography, politics, political economy, botany, geology, law, all relating to England and the English life and customs and manners. There were even books of reference such as the London Directory, the Red and Blue Books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Army and Navy lists, and it somehow gladdened my heart to see it, the law list. Whilst I was looking at the books, the door opened and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way and hoped that I had had a good night's rest. Then he went on. I am glad you found your way in here, for I am sure there is much that will interest you. These companions, and he laid his hand on some of the books, have been good friends to me, and for some years past, ever since I had the idea of going to London, have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them, I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share its life, its change, its death, and all that makes it what it is. But alas, as yet I only know your tongue through books. To you, my friend, I look that I know it to speak. But Count, I said, you know and speak English thoroughly. He bowed gravely. I thank you, my friend, for your all too flattering estimate, but yet I fear I am but a little way on the road I would travel. True, I know the grammar and the words, but yet I know not how to speak them. Indeed, I said, you speak excellently. Not so, he answered. Well, I know that, did I move and speak in your London, none there are who would not know me for a stranger. That is not enough for me. Here, I am noble, I am a boyar. The common people know me, and I am master. But a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not, and who know not is to care not for. I am content if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me, or pauses in his speaking if he hears my words. Ha ha, stranger! I have been so long master that I would be master still, or at least that none other should be master of me. You come to me not alone as agent of my friend Peter Hawkins of Exeter to tell me all about my new estate in London. You shall, I trust, rest here with me a while, so that by our talking I may learn the English intonation. And I would that you tell me when I make error, even of the smallest in my speaking. I am sorry that I had to be away so long today, but you will, I know, forgive one who has so many important affairs in hand. Of course, I said all I could about being willing, and asked if I might come into that room when I chose. He answered, yes, certainly, and added, you may go anywhere you wish in the castle, except where the doors are locked, where, of course, you will not wish to go. There is reason that all things are as they are, and did you see with my eyes and know with my knowledge, you would perhaps better understand. I said I was sure of this, and then he went on. We are in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be to you many strange things. Nay, from what you have told me of your experiences already, you know something of what strange things there may be. This led to much conversation, and as it was evident that he wanted to talk, if only for talking's sake, I asked him many questions regarding things that had already happened to me or come within my notice. Sometimes he sheered off the subject or turned the conversation by pretending not to understand, but generally he answered all I asked most frankly. Then, as time went on and I had got somewhat bolder, I asked him of some of the strange things of the preceding night, as for instance, why the coachman went to the places where he had seen the blue flames. He then explained to me that it was commonly believed that on a certain night of the year, last night in fact, when all evil spirits are supposed to have unchecked sway, a blue flame is seen over any place where treasure has been concealed. That treasure has been hidden, he went on. In the region through which you came last night, there can be but little doubt, for it was the ground fought over for centuries by the Wallachian, the Saxon, and the Turk. Why, there is hardly a foot of soil in all this region that has not been enriched by the blood of men, patriots or invaders. In the old days, there were stirring times, when the Austrian and the Hungarian came up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet them, men and women, the aged and children too, and waited their coming on the rocks above the passes that they might sweep destruction on them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little, for whatever there was had been sheltered in the friendly soil. But how, said I, can it have remained so long undiscovered, when there is a sure index to it if men will but take the trouble to look? The Count smiled, and as his lips ran back over the gums, the long, sharp canine teeth showed out strangely. He answered, because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. Those flames only appear on one night, and on that night no man of this land will, if he can help it, stir without his doors. And, dear sir, even if he did, he would not know what to do. Why, even the peasant that you tell me of, who marked the place of the flame, would not know where to look in daylight even for his own work. Even you would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find these places again. There you are right, I said. I know no more than the dead where even to look for them. Then we drifted on to other matters. Come, he said at last. Tell me of London, and of the house which you have procured for me. With an apology for my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard a rattling of china and silver in the next room, and as I passed through, noticed that the table had been cleared and the lamp lit, for it was by this time deep into the dark. The lamps were also lit in the study or library, and I found the Count lying on the sofa reading, of all things in the world, an English Bradshaw's Guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with him I went into plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything, and asked me a myriad questions about the place and its surroundings. He clearly had studied beforehand all he could get on the subject of the neighborhood, for he evidently at the end knew very much more than I did. When I remarked this, he answered, "Well, but my friend, is it not needful that I should? When I go there, I shall be all alone, and my friend Harker Jonathan, nay, pardon me, I fall into my country's habit of putting your patronymic first. My friend Jonathan Harker will not be by my side to correct and aid me. He will be in Exeter, miles away, probably working at papers of the law with my other friend Peter Hawkins. So?" We went thoroughly into the business of the purchase of the estate at Purfleet. When I had told him the facts, and got his signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter with them ready to post to Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I had come across so suitable a place. I read to him the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribe here. At Purfleet, on a by-road, I came across just such a place as seemed to be required, and where there was displayed a dilapidated notice that the place was for sale. It was surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure, built of heavy stones, and has not been repaired for a large number of years. The closed gates are of heavy old oak and iron, all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, no doubt a corruption of the old Quatre Face, as the house is four-sided, agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. It contains in all some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone wall above mentioned. There are many trees on it, which make it in places gloomy, and there is a deep, dark-looking pond, a small lake, evidently fed by some springs, as the water is clear and flows away in a fair-sized stream. The house is very large, and of all periods back, I should say to medieval times, for one part is of stone immensely thick, with only a few windows high up and heavily barred with iron. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I had not the key of the door leading to it from the house, but I have taken with my Kodak views of it from various points. The house had been added to, but in a very straggling way, and I can only guess at the amount of ground it covers, which must be very great. There are but few houses close at hand, one being a very large house only recently added to and formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds. When I had finished, he said, "I am glad that it is old and big. I myself am of an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day, and after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not to think that our bones may lie amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety nor mirth, not the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters which please the young and gay. I am no longer young, and my heart, through weary years of mourning over the dead, is attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken. The shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shade and the shadow, and would be alone with my thoughts when I may." Somehow his words and his look did not seem to accord. or else it was that the cast of his face made his smile look malignant and saturnine. Presently, with an excuse, he left me, asking me to pull my papers together. He was some little time away, and I began to look at some of the books around me. One was an atlas, which I found open naturally to England, as if that map had been much used. On looking at it, I found in certain places little rings marked, and on examining these, I noticed that one was near London on the east side, manifestly where his new estate was situated. The other two were at Exeter and Whitby on the Yorkshire coast. It was the better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha," he said. "Still at your books? Good. But you must not work always. Come, I am informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm, and we went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready on the table. The Count again excused himself, as he had dined out on his being away from home. But he sat as on the previous night, and chatted whilst I ate. After supper I smoked as on the last evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions on every conceivable subject, hour after hour. I felt that it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes in every way. I was not sleepy, as the long sleep yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help experiencing that chill which comes over one at the coming of the dawn, which is like, in its way, the turn of the tide. They say that people who are near death die generally at the change to dawn or at the turn of the tide. Anyone who has, when tired, and tied as it were to his post, experienced this change in the atmosphere can well believe it. All at once we heard the crow of the cock coming up with preternatural shrillness through the clear morning air. Count Dracula, jumping to his feet, said, "Why, there is the morning again! How remiss I am to let you stay up so long! You must make your conversation regarding my dear new country of England as interesting, so that I may not forget how time flies by us." And with a courtly bow, he quickly left me. I went into my room and drew the curtains, but there was little to notice. My window opened into the courtyard. All I could see was the warm grey of the quickening sky. So I pulled the curtains again, and have written of this day. 8th of May. I began to fear as I wrote in this book that I was getting too diffuse, but now I am glad that I went into detail from the first, for there is something so strange about this place and all in it that I cannot but feel uneasy. I wish I was safe out of it, or that I had never come. It may be that this strange night existence is telling on me, but would that that were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it, but there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and he... I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place. Let me be prosaic so far as facts can be. It will help me to bear up, and imagination must not run riot with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say at once how I stand, or seem to. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window, and was just beginning to shave. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and heard the Count's voice saying to me, "Good morning." I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had cut myself slightly, but did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder, but there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed. There was no sign of a man in it, except myself. This was startling, and coming on top of so many strange things, was beginning to increase that vague feeling of uneasiness which I always have when the Count is near. But at the instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did so half round to look for some sticking plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demoniac fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then, seizing the shaving glass, he went on, And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it. And opening the window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stones of the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew without a word. It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave, unless in my watch case or the bottom of the shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not find the Count anywhere, so I breakfasted alone. It is strange that as yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. He must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle is on the very edge of a terrific precipice. A stone falling from the window would fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can reach is a sea of green treetops, with occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Here and there are silver threads where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forests. But I am not in heart to describe beauty, so when I had seen the view I explored further. Doors, doors, doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted. In no place save from the windows and the castle walls is there an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. Recorded for LibriVox.org, February 2006.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Gordon Mackenzie. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Chapter 3. Jonathan Harker's Journal, continued. When I found that I was a prisoner,
I'll be right
a sort
back.
of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out of every window I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all other feelings. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly, as quietly as I have ever done anything in my life, and began to think over what was best to be done. I am thinking still, and as yet have come to no definite conclusion. Of one thing only am I certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and as he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it, he would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan will be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself, my eyes open. I am, I know, either being deceived, like a baby, by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits. If the latter be so, I need, and shall need, all my brains to get through. I had hardly come to this
Hey,
conclusion
Sterling,
when
how
I
you
heard
doing?
the great door below shut
Good to see you.
and knew that the Count had returned. He did not come at once into the library, so I went cautiously to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought, that there are no servants in the house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door laying the table in the dining room, I was assured of it. For if he does himself all these menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else in the castle. It must have been the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is a terrible thought. For if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves as he did, by only holding up his hand for silence? How was it that all the people at Bistritz, and on the coach had some terrible fear for me. What meant the giving of the crucifix, the garlic, of the wild rose, of the mountain ash? Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is odd that a thing which I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should in a time of loneliness and trouble.
Give me 1 second.
help.
I'll grab Ozzy real quick.
Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Sometime, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make up my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight he may talk of himself, if I turn the conversation that way. I must be very careful, however, not to awake his suspicion.
No?
Midnight. I've had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvania history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present at them all. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar, the pride of his house and name is his own pride, that their glory is his glory, that their fate is his fate.
He's a little tired.
Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. It seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and walked about the room pulling his great white mustache, and grasping anything on which he laid his hands as though he would crush it by main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We Zeklis have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here, in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers display to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held it in their veins, ran the blood of those old witches who, expelled from Scythia, had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools, fools! What devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in these veins? He held up his arms. Is it a wonder that we were a conquering race? That we were proud? That when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, that we drove them back? Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier, that the Honfoglalas was completed there, and when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, the Zekelis were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries was trusted the guarding of the frontier of Turkeyland. Aye, and more than that. Endless duty of the frontier guard, for as the Turks say,
Water sleeps, and the enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the 4 nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king? When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kosova, when the flags of the Valak and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race, who as voivod crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them. Was it not this Dracula, indeed, who inspired that other of his race, who, in a later age, again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. They said that he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? Where ends the war without a brain and a heart to conduct it? Again, when after the Battle of Mohacs, we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood were amongst their leaders. For our spirit would not brook that we were not free. Ah, young son, the Zekalis and the Dracula, as their heart's blood, their brains and their swords, can boast a record that mushroom growths like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs could never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing in these days of dishonorable peace. And the glories of the great races are as a tale that is told.
It was by this time close on morning, and we went to bed. Memorandum. This diary seems horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights, where everything has to break off at cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. 12th of May. Let me begin with facts. Bare, meager facts, verified by books and figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experiences, which will have to rest on my own observation or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began by asking me questions on legal matters and on the doings of certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearily over books, and, simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters I had been examined in at Lincoln's Inn. There was a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in sequence. The knowledge may somehow, or some time, be useful to me. First, he asked if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he might have a dozen if he wished, but that it would not be wise to have more than 1 solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that to change would be certain to militate against his interest. He seemed thoroughly to understand, and went on to ask if there would be any practical difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking and another to shipping, in case local help were needed in a place far from home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more fully so that I might not by any chance mislead him. So he said, "I
I shall illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys for me through your good self my place at London. Now here let me say frankly, lest you should think it strange that I have sought the services of one so far off from London instead of someone resident there, that my motive was that no local interest might be served, save my wish only, and as one of London residents might perhaps have some purpose of himself or friend to serve. I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labor should be only to my interest. Now, suppose I, who have much of affairs, wish to ship goods, say, to Newcastle or Durham or Harwich or Dover. Might it not be that it could be with more ease be done by consigning to one in these ports? I answered that certainly it would be most easy, but that we solicitors had a system of agency, one for the other, so that local work could be done locally on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply by placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without further trouble. But, said he, I could be at liberty to direct myself. Is it not so? Of course, I replied, and such is often done by men of business, who do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any one person. Good, he said, and then went on to ask about the means of making consignments and the forms to be gone through, and of all sorts of difficulties which might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against. I explained all these things to him to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. When he had satisfied himself on these points on which he had spoken, and I had verified all as well as I could by the books available, he suddenly stood up and said, Have you written, since your first letter, to our friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other? It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, that as yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anybody. Then write now, my young friend, he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. Write to our friend, to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me until a month from now. Do you wish me to stay so long? I asked, for my heart grew cold at the thought. I desire it much. Nay, I will take no refusal. When your master, employer, what you will, engaged that someone should come on his behalf, it was understood that my needs only were to be consulted. I have not stinted. Is it not so? What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interest, not mine. And I had to think of him, not myself, and besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes and in his bearing which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished it, I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his master.
All right, everyone, I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by. Excuse me, and everyone keep stopping by. I appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.